guys were both higher than and guys were both lower than the market on, and maybe a few rankings debates if we have time. That's what we're talking about today on The Long View. I'm Ben Gretsch. You can find the Stealing Signals newsletter at bengretsch.substack.com. With me, as always, is Jacob Sanderson. You can find the Thinking About Thinking newsletter at jacobsanderson.substack.com. There's plenty of short view stuff to discuss today, Jacob. We got to start with the Jeanty stuff. There's going to be some long discussions in the short view. We always discuss how long we're going to be in the short view. It's going to be long. Hopefully we'll do it somewhat quickly because you've also compiled from our rankings, guys, that we are both above market on, guys we are both below market on, and then guys where you're higher, guys where I'm higher. It's a long list, and I was saying to you before the show, it's like about 5 names for each or 6 names for each. So it's over 20 names. They're all conversations that for us could be 15 minutes a player. They're very interesting. I want to get through them all as best as we can. And so we've talked about this might be a part 1 of our sort of rankings discussions. We'll take it as we go in terms of how long the show's going. We're not going to do a 5-hour podcast. This will probably be a 3-hour podcast. I always love talking about the time when we start because the listener knows. They've clicked the button already. They know if it's a 3-hour because it's already there.
It's always fun. Yeah, I mean, I guess this time it's a surprise for the listener, though, because they don't know if they're listening to a 3-hour part one or a 3-hour entire show. I know from firsthand experience, like any time that I've written in the intro, which this is even goofier because I could just write the article and then write the intro afterwards. But it's like I do it almost to like make a false promise to myself where sometimes I'll be like, this is part 1 of 2 in a series. And then it's like I get to the end of the article and I realize this is actually part 1 of 6. Hopefully that doesn't repeat itself today. But like,
well, and that's
I did that ambiguous wide receiver room series, which ended up being like, I think a 7-part series that was like 5,000 words per. And I had the audacity to lie to myself in the first article and be like, this will be a 2-part series. And I was like, yeah, okay, good one. Well,
Jacob. I was thinking the exact same thing when I was like, we have a long short view and we have 6, it looks like 6+ players for each of 4 different categories, and they could all be 15-minute convos. So we might split this up into 2 parts. You know, we're planning for 3 hours today. Dude, we're going to be at the 3-hour mark while we're still talking about like the first group of players that are us over the market. But we're going to do our best. We should get into the short view now. But yeah, lot of players to discuss. There's a lot of really interesting discussions we're going to have in the short view list that you've compiled here, and a lot of really interesting players. It's going to be a little bit of that full short view show, a lot of micro discussions. We'll try to not get too nuanced, but the whole reason this pod is called The Long View is we like to go multiple layers deep. We started late this summer, right? Next offseason, We're going to have time to have player discussions all offseason. Every episode we'll be going deep on stuff. The health of our content longevity right now, it's strong. We're not going to run out of things to discuss, I don't think. No. But what are we doing on the short view this week?
All right, so we'll start off. Let's just talk about the biggest story and one of the craziest 6-hour periods in fantasy drafting that I can recall. Like, it's the kind of thing that could only happen in 2026, right, where everyone's on their phones. There's a million different ways to play fantasy football. And so the range in prices and takes and drafts was wild. Of course, I'm talking about the 5 to 6 hours on Sunday where the consensus was that Ashton Jeanty, a 1-2 turn pick, the guy that I put on the freaking cover of my draft guide, was potentially going to be lost for the entire season. And then we find out later it's not a knee injury. It's not a season-ending injury. It's a sprained ankle. And since then, the news has been increasingly bizarre. We have Ian Rappaport come out, say it's more low than high. Clint Kubiak has refused to directly comment other than to say, I think something like, God has a plan for us or whatever.
Something about the power of prayer and like we prayed and so now he's healthy. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
which I mean, tough break for all the other people that prayed for their injuries, but got bad news. Apparently God doesn't love you.
Yeah. Apparently Ashton Jeanty is God's favorite. So, anyways, what we know now is still like not a very definitive prognosis, but, we have the best info we have is from Ian Rappaport, who said it's more low than high. That was the quote. Assuming it's on the more severe side and it's a grade 2 inversion sprain or low ankle sprain, that would usually carry a 3 to 6 week recovery period. He suffered the injury exactly 3 weeks before their first game, and so that would mean at the absolute best case scenario, he could, in theory, be ready week 1. I think more likely he misses a couple of weeks. With the information, which is admittedly imperfect, that we have available, how are you currently approaching Jeanty and Mike Washington in ADP?
Yeah, good question. I saw your stuff on it as well as you were talking about some of the different rankings adjustments you had done. I spent that 6-hour period basically just writing about this situation, which is sort of
that and going to Taco Bell.
And going to Taco Bell as well, right? I posted on social media that I was coping with the Jeanty news by going to Taco Bell. But I found out because one of my subscribers like emailed and I saw it pop up on my phone and was like, I'm sure you're all over this, but the Jeanty injury, yada, yada, yada. And I go look and Schefter had posted it 11 minutes ago. And I was like, I'm not all over this. And I appreciate that you let me know. Like I wasn't quick enough to have an alert go off 11 minutes after for Schefter. Probably it's about time to get my alerts turned on, but I don't have any like key alerts on anyway. I wrote something really quick and then I got some feedback on the Mike Washington stuff. And I then wrote a really long deep dive into Mike Washington because every report from that camp, or, people that were there was like very somber, like very, very somber. And I understand the scene was somber, that they turned the music off and everyone prayed. But the idea that like the only descriptions we got was like Jeanty dove for it. There was dove for a pass. There was contact and he couldn't put any weight on it. He had to be helped off by 2 people, couldn't put any weight on all these things. I'm not trying to be critical of observers, but the fact that not one of them was willing to be like, this may not be a blown out knee. You can tell if you watch enough football, the difference between like contact to the knee and a rolled ankle. Like, I'm sorry, but I'm a little bit frustrated actually by the fact that everyone was like, I don't want to be the guy that says it's not serious. And also that you're going to get more clicks and views and links if it sounds more serious in those things. And so there's sort of anyway, we got the sensationalist stuff that it was the end of the world.
Bizarre scenario where there's no video, right? And so all you're getting is like descriptions. And I agree. I
watched like 4 of those and every single one of them.
But like I would say that I'm like pretty accurate at like guessing what an injury is if I see a video. Like I'm willing to bet that if people had been put under the truth serum and like described what they saw, I don't know, how do you mistake an ankle injury for a knee injury? It's weird.
I don't think anyone was saying specifically knee. That's sort of the frustrating thing though, but you have to understand the context of what you're saying when you're like, it's, it was a leg. Maybe some people were talking about knee or there was concern for knee or whatever, but you're certainly describing a scene that's like, this guy is done for the year. You understand what the NFL is. I watched like 4 of those videos, like those firsthand reports, because we didn't have video of it. And every one of them was like vaguely hinting at the play and then unwilling to be like, to speculate further. I don't know. Anyway, that is what it is. But that's a lot of people read that as Jeanty's going to be out for the year. When you're not saying like to me, when you're not saying more, you're pretty tacitly implying like there is a very serious thing about to drop, right? And that's the way that everybody took it, I think, for the most part. But anyway, we're not going to spend too much time on like the weirdness of that day. I think people need, if you're reporting like live from a scene and you're reporting in generally, like getting information right is very crucial. And so like try to describe what you saw, try to be as accurate as you can. Like that's my take. But the Jeanty thing, he did seem like he was done. I wrote up a really long thing about Mike Washington, thought we would get a lot on Mike Washington. You and I have, I think, differing opinions on Mike Washington, the player, because I mentioned I saw a few of your notes. You were pretty into him pre-draft. I think there's a lot of limitations to the profile, actually, personally.
I don't know that I would say that I was that into him. I would say I wrote him up like pre-draft, of course. My write-up probably was like a little bit more like he was not expected to fall to day 3, so I was kind of writing him up under the assumption he was going to be a day 2 pick at the time that I did the deep dive. I thought his analytical profile was terrible in terms of like 5-year guy, was decidedly less efficient, less productive than Seth McGowan when they played together in a previous year. I did like his tape, and then you have the athletic measurables that I think are interesting. So I would consider myself like mildly intrigued, but most of my enthusiasm about him at this point, like would be, or I guess at that point is really the way I would put it, was more related to like just kind of the opportunity in front of him. I might be a little higher on him than you as a talent, but I think there's pretty massive deficiencies with the profile.
Okay. Yeah, you sort of where you landed him and some of that stuff. Like, I have really big concerns about the ability to be a workhorse and all of those things. And if Jeanty was really out for the year or was going to miss considerable time, I was like pretty confident that they would bring in somebody. And I was like comparing him to like somewhat to Woody Marks not really to Woody Marks, but anyway, I wrote a long deep dive on that. I think he's super athletic. The fact that you can't, like, people double count. They're like, oh, here's the fun things, and then he's also super athletic. The fact that he was expected to be a day 2 guy, as you said, and fell to day 3. Everyone in the NFL knows he blew up the combine. The fact that nobody took him until round 4, and then also the fact that when he was in college, he was at all these small schools, and then it wasn't until year 5 or 2 different small schools, and then smaller schools, and then he wasn't very good in these weaker conferences, and it wasn't until year 5 he transfers to an SEC school. Did have a really good 5th year. But like, so did Xavier Legette, was a comparison I made, where it's like, that was a guy that took until his 5th year, but he had a legitimately great 3+ yards per route run, legitimately great, 5th year. And he was an athletic freak, 9.9 RAS. And I was like, yeah, I mean, at least he showed that he could turn that athleticism into production. That's kind of what we have on Mike Washington. It's like, hey, at least he showed it in his final year. But the rest of it, the fact that you were that athletic and no school really wanted you until that point, and you really didn't turn it into that much production. The last year was much better than the other years, but there's still like a very subpar evasion rate and some of that stuff. It's basically like he just ran to daylight a few times that last year, which maybe he would do in a Clint Kubiak system. I mean, there's still reasons to be optimistic. But anyway, we're like, he's relevant because we're going to get probably some early season work from him. It doesn't sound like Jeanty's going to be out forever. It does seem like Jeanty's going to, like, I think loosely, I don't know how you're playing it, but loosely I'm thinking of it as like maybe the first month I'm not expecting a ton out of Jeanty. Maybe he's startable by week 4 or week 5. Maybe it's week 6, something in that range.
Yeah. My median expectation would be he misses like 2 weeks with some error bars on either side of that. And then I would expect him to be less efficient with a lower workload than I would have otherwise expected for another 2 to 3 weeks after that. So,
right.
And like, who knows, but that's kind of my median expectation.
If he only misses a couple weeks. Yeah. So I saw that you had him up by like, I immediately was saying I would take him I wrote the Washington deep dive, and then we got the ankle news 90 minutes after I posted the Washington deep dive. And so then I wrote a third piece, and I was like, okay, here's where I'm at with all this news. And I put him in that Love Hall range. I think I had him behind those guys at that time. I've since moved him back up to like RB10. He's a tier lower than I had him before in my running back tiers, but I still think I got a question today about like what you do in the middle of the second now if you are trying to get an early running back, and that 1-2 turn is now thinned out without Jeanty, and it's like, would you bring up Breece Hall? Because I have Breece Hall as a target. My subscribers know that like I'm pretty into him. I'm like, yeah, but it's tough because you probably could get, in a lot of leagues, you can get Breece Hall in the middle of the 3rd, and I don't want to just give up that kind of draft capital. And then I was like, I think the interesting thing to consider is whether you just take Jeanty in the middle of the 2nd at that point. It's a little aggressive, but if you're in like a home league, and it's not that particularly hard to make the playoffs in home leagues, and
especially if it's like 8 teams make the playoffs, which is the case in some of them.
Yeah, sure. But like even the ones that 6 out of 12 make it,
yeah,
you can't use Jeanty for the first 4 weeks or whatever. It's still a 14-week regular season in those formats.
Yep.
And yeah, you're getting off to a little bit of a slow start, but it's a time when the rest of your roster's healthy. You should be able to find 2 running backs to start. Big reason why I like taking some running backs early is I think there's a lot of mispriced wide receivers. We're going to talk about them a lot. I think you can still build as deep of a wide receiver room as you used to be able to build when you went 0 RB. Like the idea of 0 RB was like you got to get 6 really good receivers in the first 7 or 8 rounds or whatever. Now you can get 6 really good receivers, but you don't have to do it until around 10 or 11 because I just think there's misprices there. And so why not take the early running backs? I mean, if you can get Breece in the middle of the 3rd and you go running back, you go JT, Jeanty, Breece, and then you start taking, maybe you take a tight end, like if a Loveland falls in the 4th in your home league, and you start taking like receivers in the 5th round, you can still build a good enough receiver. It's going to be a weaker receiver room if you don't start till the 5th round. It's not going to have an elite. It's not going to have a really stud at the top. You're still going to miss the, Zay Flowers, Garrett Wilson tier that's sometimes fun in the third round, whatever. Garrett Wilson maybe sometimes fun in the fourth round if you're fortunate enough. But even still, I think you can start in the fifth round, and then I would just hammer a receiver for like 6 straight rounds, and you're going to be fine, honestly. Like, your receivers are going to be okay. And then you can play without Jeanty with your first and third rounders. You played Taylor and Hall early. And as soon as Genty's back, you're flexing him. Like, it's absurd.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that I would say to definitely do that, but that's where my mind's at this moment today. And then as far as Washington, it's like, I moved him to RB 38 at this point. It's like, he's interesting. I compared him to Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt last year because I think that's where the profile is when Jeanty was expected to be out, because that's the comparison. I was saying to somebody else, it was the wrong one, Woody Marks. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt last year is a comparison because it was like he could take the lead work. He doesn't have a ton of receiving background. Washington caught some passes, but his receiving efficiency is not good, and he's a bad pass blocker. And people are pointing out this year the long down distance stuff doesn't matter. I've been saying that for years. Or it's not prohibitive to a ceiling. People used to say like you had to have a certain number of routes, and then they would really overfixate on not having the long down and distance routes. I've written stealing signals for years. When a guy has like 40% running back routes, but not the long down and distance role, I tend to caveat that. And so anyway, I have been making that point over the years. Mike Washington would look like that in a lead role probably, and that's what I was thinking. Sort of similar to what you were thinking when you were going in with Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt last year, and I don't even think his routes got to that range necessarily, and Washington's might not have either. The point being that when Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt was like, okay, whatever, it worked a certain type of way. But I think people were thinking of him a lot higher than that because there wasn't competition on the roster like people saw with Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt last year. Because remember, Austin Eckler was on the roster. He got hurt in like week 2. Obviously more guys, Chris Rodriguez. But the Washington thing, this year, there's no one on the roster. I was saying if Jeanty's out for the year, you assume someone's going to be on the roster. They're going to bring somebody in. They're going to bring a veteran of some sort. They're not going to put a rookie out there and expect that much, who wasn't even a workhorse in college, who fell to day 3. Like, they took him as more of a project by that point when you're thinking, I don't know if they would say that, but when you're thinking his capital was supposed to be higher and he falls a little, you're like, oh, we're getting a little bit of a value. There's a athleticism here, all these things, but like, can he do everything? Like, look at the rookie running backs last year that couldn't do the pass blocking and stuff. They lost playing time as a result. Teams want more stability, ability to do everything from their running back rooms.
His pass pro was horrendous.
It was like last in class, right?
I thought it was like I didn't like watch extensive tape on every running back in the class, but of the like top 10 or so that I did, I thought he had the worst pass pro reps of anyone I watched.
Yeah, I mean, if he's that bad, like, you're thinking, like, just because there's no one else on the roster presently doesn't mean it doesn't change into the future, right? Like, these things evolve, and like, they could make a trade midseason. Like, I was bringing some other names up in my long write-up. Was like, if Charbonnet came back, Emmanuel Wilson has seemed to have lost favor in Seattle. Maybe Seattle makes Emmanuel Wilson available for trade in week 4 or week 5. Tyrone Tracy seems like he's super available. He was a name I threw out there. There's other guys that could be available. But like, even if they didn't add someone significant, or the guy they added wasn't good, like they pick up Trey Benson and Trey Benson can't get healthy. If they trade for Emmanuel Wilson week 4, your Mike Washington shares they're not dust, but they get damaged really significantly because Emmanuel Wilson can do everything he did last year, like when Josh Jacobs was out. And like, they're going to want that stability. It's going to dramatically affect that playing time ceiling. It's this point about uncertainty. We do this with projected touches with running backs. It gets all back to the whole dead zone point. The original dead zone article that I wrote, I talked about Alex Collins was being he was drafted as a top 100 pick, and I was like, it's not clear who would take this work, but Alex Collins' profile doesn't suggest he can take, like, whatever it was, probably at that time 16 games worth of lead running back work. He should not be drafted as a top 100 pick. This is the problem with the running back dead zone. We project a bunch of volume to players that you shouldn't actually expect them to take, and what ended up happening was rookie UDFA Gus Edwards had 150 carries that year. None of us would project a rookie UDFA for 150 carries. It's not about projecting the individual person. It's about the uncertainty element of it. Anyway, Mike Washington, you could probably get some early playing time. He's a handcuff. I think you can take him in the range of where like Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt goes this year. And I have him a little bit behind JCM at this point, but that's where I land. Where do you land with those guys?
Yeah, so the initial reaction I saw, like when people thought Jeanty might be out for the year, I was seeing people say like, I would rank him in like the Price, Bucky, Judkins range. I was never on board with that. I thought that was pretty wild, honestly. I'm way more likely to play him actually now than then, I've been drafting him a decent chunk now because, if Jeanty's going to be fine, he's only going to miss a couple of weeks, then they're probably not going to add someone. Like, I think they're probably much more willing to play Washington and see what he can do for like 2 weeks as a fill-in versus relying on him for an entire season. What I wrote up mostly is like my ranking of him is not really that important, and it's more about your team construction because I think he's a pretty specific use case player. Like, if you go 0 running back, then I think he's pretty useful because you're probably getting to start him in week 1 as a feature back against the Miami Dolphins. And that's pretty fun. Like we just did a main event stream on Monday where.
But when are you starting him week 1? When do you have such bad running backs that you would make that gamble on a player that we don't know if he's going to play on pass downs? And
I mean, I think he's probably going to rate as like I would guess that I have him like in weekly rankings week 1 as like the RB 16.
Oh, that's way too high. That's way too high.
Who else are they going to play? They're playing the worst team in the league, and
he had the two. But like his profile's not. There's 16 healthy running backs that are really good.
I don't know. Maybe it's RB 19. I mean, like, okay, so if you're doing like a 0 RB team, I'll give you the exact example of the team where we drafted him. We took him at like the 10-11 turn or something. So our RB1 is Bucky Irving. Obviously, we're starting him. And then we took Jonathan Brooks as our RB2, who I have no idea what to expect out of Jonathan Brooks.
Okay.
And then we took Rachaad White was our next running back. And then Mike Washington is our running back after that. And Chris Rodriguez is our running back after that. We're almost certainly starting Mike Washington at RB2 on that team. Week 1. I mean,
yeah, I mean, that's
Jeanty's
when you get into like Jonathan Brooks and some of the some of that questionable stuff, I don't know. I would probably still just start Brooks because I think he's a meaningfully better player. I don't think the Raiders are very good. I understand they're playing the Dolphins, and so there's some. So the issue with Washington for me is like he didn't actually have a very good breakaway run rate. He didn't actually have the evasion like that. I don't think he's that good probably as a runner. Like you were talking about the analytic profiles, not so everyone is really excited right now because he had 2 long runs in the preseason, and they were both like 30-yard runs, which is I don't know. Actually, maybe the first one was like a 50-yard run. The second one was a 33-yard run. And that's fine, but I was also thinking in my head, like 33 yards on one run doesn't make your whole day. Regardless, he had 13 other carries in the preseason. They went for a 2.5 yards per carry. Like I'm not like you're not supposed to just take out the long runs out of the yards per carry, whatever. It's relevant on a player whose profile was what it was in college that we're making a big deal about 2 preseason runs and not talking about the fact that basically every other run he got stuffed and didn't find space and didn't consistently fall forward. If he doesn't play on pass downs, I think they probably play like Lauby or Gumbawale on pass downs week 1. He's a rookie who was terrible in pass protection.
Do, but that's
so how often are you getting, you might get multiple touchdowns, but how often are you getting more than like 15, 16 carries, maybe a couple of catches, maybe 2 catches. Like you might get 0 catches.
Okay, if you give me 15 carries and 2 catches against the Miami Dolphins.
I'm saying how often do you get that? How often do you get that? Because I don't even know that you're getting that. And what if the rushing... Okay, then we disagree on. And then I think the rushing might be inefficient.
I think it's very different if we're talking about because I agree with your larger analysis on if Ashton Jeanty was out for the year, I think they would have had to build in more contingency plans. And how could you really trust this guy? If I'm the Raiders at this point, and I'm looking at it as Ashton Jeanty is coming back, he's going to miss a couple weeks at the beginning of the season. Like our team stinks. And we're using this as a developmental year. Why would I not want to use week 1 as like an opportunity to evaluate my rookie draft pick and see?
Oh, for sure. I think you give him carries. I think you go more pass heavy and you do a little bit more stuff towards Brock Bowers and stuff in the game plan. You're also playing Miami, who's going to slow the game way down. This is going to be a game with like sub 60 plays on both sides. It's not going to be a very exciting fantasy game in my mind. And so the way I'm thinking about it from a box score perspective is like Mike Washington gets like 10 to 12 carries. They do use some other backs a little bit. They give Agumbawale some carries. Those guys combine for like 6 other ones, and they only have like 18 RB carries the whole game because teams do have games like that. It wouldn't be that surprising. Maybe they'll have a bunch more, but I don't think they're going to be, and maybe they'll dominate Miami. Maybe they'll win by 3 touchdowns and they'll have a bunch of late rushing. I don't see that playing out in this game situation, and so I'm like, and then even if you get the 15 carries, you're worried about the rush efficiency was the point I was also trying to drive home. You could get the explosive runs. If they don't come, you may get 3 yards a carry. You may get like 50 rushing yards.
For a lot of running back. I mean, I don't know. I think that it's the way I would look at him is he's a clear RB2, which like I would not draft him ahead of running backs that I think have a legitimate path to standalone value. Or over running backs that have a pathway to like straight up taking a job. So like I would take Jonah Coleman ahead of him, for example. He obviously doesn't have week 1 standalone value, but I think it's within Jonah Coleman's range of outcomes to like take a job over the course of the season. I don't think Mike Washington has that. But I would take him ahead of almost any like clear backup on specific teams. But it depends on what your team is. So like, you know, if I draft Bijan Robinson in round 1 and Breece Hall, then I'm never starting Mike Washington early season. And so all I then care about is his like mid to late season outlook, in which case, yeah, I'd rather have like Tank Bigsby. Or I'd rather have running backs who I think their pure contingent value is better. But if I have a weakness at running back and I've drafted like a hero RB or zero RB team, then I think that I would rather take the bet on a guy that I think I could get use out of early season. And I mean, Ashton Jeanty is probably already now like at more risk of getting re-injured than like any healthy running back is of getting injured. So I think that that's where I would slot him in. Like it's a very construction dependent play for me. But I do think, I guess the point I would drive home is I think sometimes in these like 1-2 game spot starts, you see teams allocate more touches to a running back in this type of spot than they would if they were around for the full season. Like one of the examples I think of is Kyle Monangai, who's a running back who I thought had a really uninspiring profile. And remember, like there was the one spot start where DeAndre Swift went out and they were like, we're just going to give Kyle Monangai 90% of the work. If Swift was out for the rest of the season, I don't think that would have happened. I think they would have been like, we're going to take it easy on this guy. We're going to need to rely on him over the course of the season. We're going to work him in, but we're going to find a way to use other guys. And
so,
but
let me jump in here because
they were like, let's just let this guy go. And I could see something like that for Washington.
That was week 9 after he had worked into a clear 1B role for 3 weeks. Kyle Monangai, your bull case for that big of a role, played 9 snaps in week 1 as a backup. And then he played 28 in week 2. My point is, how do you trust this week 1? I don't think we're super far off, but the reason I've been trying to make a little bit of the bull case is you were like, you kind of jumped in when I was saying the negative stuff and said we weren't far off. The reason I noticed you got higher on your ranks on Washington than me is like, I don't agree that almost any case, I think I would start the other running backs. Even I think the case you gave me, I would start the other running backs over in week 1. The way I would play Washington, I think he's build dependent, and I think what you said makes some sense. The way I would play him is I would want to probably see it week 1, which sucks because that is the Miami matchup. That's like a little bit more of a favorable matchup. But the idea that Vegas is going to give the Kyle Monangai week 9 role to a first game rookie would be a little surprising to me. I think all of the questionable snaps will go to veterans on the roster. I don't know if that's a Gumpawale or Lauby or whoever it would be, but I think he would start. I think he would get early down rushing work early in the game, and then I think as the game flow went on and they had some 2-minute drill stuff, he'd be off the field for sure. And as the second half went on, if they fell behind at all, he'd be off the field because they would be in too clear of a passing situation.
He could get scripted out for sure.
Very quickly. And if they were ahead, I think he would maybe stay on, but there's this possibility that to make it I think he'd only be on for clear rushing plays. I think he could play like a 30% snap share and still lead the team with rushes. But I think everyone was like, yeah, he's going to be a 80% runner. They don't have anyone else on the roster. And I could see that too. I'm not saying that's impossible. I'm just trying to express that I didn't see the restraint from, not you. I think you're showing way more restraint even in this conversation than some of the stuff I saw on Twitter. Some stuff on Twitter I saw was clicking on the depth chart, seeing no one else. And this is not from the good analysts. There's other people that are on him because they're on the talent profile or a lot of different things. I'm not trying to criticize anyone individually who's cast a blanket over everyone who was high on Mike Washington. But I saw people who are basically they have no one else on the roster. They would have to play Mike Washington a ton. And it's just not how it works. Somebody who you're not thinking of would play more than you're thinking because you can't give a rookie with this many red flags 75% of the snaps in week 1. Maybe you can, but I don't think that's what they would do. That would surprise me from Clint Kubiak in his first game as a head coach. And I think that's where the little bit of disconnect is all I was saying. I don't disagree with any of your points about playing him
I think
on
you
teams
have him
where
ranked higher than me, by the way.
I just moved him up this morning because I was looking at recent
I'm actually.
drafts.
I don't think. I'm actually certain you have him ranked higher than me, considerably.
I just looked at ADP this morning and I moved him up like several spots, but I mean it's not really the point. I don't think he's like particularly draftable. The ranking. So we're gonna get into the ranking discussion. We talked about this pre-show. He may be more draftable in your. Where do you have him ranked? I guess is the question.
Well, like so you have him. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like do you have? I'm looking at your ranks. You have him ahead of like Dobbins, Rodriguez, Rachaad White, Marshawn Lloyd, Kyle Monangai, Chuba Hubbard, Aaron Jones, Jonah Coleman. I like all those guys over him.
So I had him behind all those guys until this morning when I looked at recent high stakes ADP and realized I was way behind the market, and I moved him up. I had him in that tier below. I moved him up to the back of the tier ahead. So this is the point with rankings. Chuba Hubbard and Aaron Jones are clear fades for me that I have way below rank, and so now we're going to talk about this with rankings. I have this is a bigger thing at wide receiver. I have Quentin Johnson, Alec Pierce, Cortland Sutton, a lot of these guys as clear fades. And so then relative to ADP, I have like a guy like a Michael Pittman was a name I gave you. I was looking at ADP this morning. I have Michael Pittman very close to ADP, but I have him functionally behind ADP by several spots because of how aggressive I am on some other fades, because I have multiple players that are drafted behind Pittman going ahead of him. The same thing is true here. Like you just named all the guys right behind Washington. It sounds like I'm super high in Washington. I still have Keaton Mitchell ahead of him. I still have Ja'Cory Crosky, Merritt, Jordan Mason, Kenneth Gainwell, some of my targets ahead of him. I don't think anyone using my rankings would find that they're going to like need to take Mike Washington, but I'll probably move him back down. I literally moved him up like 10 running back slots this morning based on recent drafts. It's surprising to me that I have him ahead of you based on the way you wrote about him. I'm talking about the way you wrote about him and the way you're talking about him on the show.
Well, I mean, I wrote about him
because initially you had him up with like Travion Henderson and those guys.
No,
like,
I never.
That was your first reaction. I thought your first reaction was.
I said, I wrote that if Ashton Jeanty is confirmed to be out for the season,
you would take him that high.
Mike Washington.
Sorry, that's what I meant.
I had written. And not next to Travion Henderson. I had written that he would be a clear tier behind Henderson and Price, but that if Jeanty was out for the year, I would put him into the same tier as Stevenson, Dowdle, and Warren. But then Jeanty's not out for the year, so
sorry, that's what I meant. Because the reactions I was seeing were all caveating it that way. They were all, if Jeanty's out for the year, here's where I'll draft him. Some people were like 5th, 6th round. Some people were saying with Travion Henderson.
Round.
You still came in quite a bit higher than when I did the Mike Washington deep dive. I was like, I don't think I can take him that high. I would take him lower than that, but I guess not meaningfully lower than you. I had that mistaken on where you have him. But yeah, but then you also said the week 1 start thing with Miami. So I was like, yeah, Jacob's kind of high on this guy. So anyway, it sounds like we're pretty close.
I guess my question to you would be, if you're not starting him in week 1, no matter what, why would you draft this guy ahead of like Emmett Johnson?
That's where I originally put him, was with Emmett Johnson. In my first write-up, I was like, that's where I put him. And everyone I saw in the market or in the industry was way higher.
Because my take would be, if I have 3 running backs I'm confident in, I would legitimately rather have Emmett Johnson because I prefer his contingent value. So the only reason I even have him as high as I do is because, like, and my specific advice was like, basically play this guy in direct relation to your early season roster construction, because if you have the type of running back room in which either you might want to start him week 1 or you don't start him week 1, but if he has a way better role than expected week 1 and Jeanty's not back in week 2, maybe you start him in week 2. But like, if you're not going to get any early season value out of him, then to me, I'd rather have Emmett Johnson straight up, because to me,
I wrote the 3
value.
For sure. I wrote the 3 pieces on that Sunday after we got the word on the sprained ankle. The last thing that I did was I moved him back behind Jonah Coleman and right between Jonah Coleman and Emmett Johnson, because I had him back to back in my rankings at that time. I've shifted a little bit because I'm like really high on Emmett Johnson, but I completely agree. But that's where I had moved him as of Sunday night. And then, like I said, so I have this little tool that I've built that I look at like relative to ADP, including high stakes ADP. And I was comparing this morning some different ADPs, some different players at Underdog, FFPC, NFFC. And even after I moved Mike Washington to 38, I'm like, even with the market in the last few days, which I started Monday. I waited until after the ankle. I just looked Monday to Wednesday.
Oh, okay.
We're recording this Wednesday. I looked after the ankle. Yeah. And according to what I have, from Monday to Wednesday at NFFC, he is RB 37. At FFPC, he's RB 41. So I had moved him up to RB 38. But again, like, I have multiple guys going behind him, ranked above him. Like, that for me with a player like Washington means I'm actually probably slightly behind market, because I have a bunch of guys that I'm way behind market on. Like Dobbins, I have several spots behind market now. I've talked about this ever since, Jonah Coleman has looked really good in the preseason, and kind of thinking through that. Like, I just don't think Dobbins is a great play. I've moved him way down. I'm like 7 to 9 spots at all 3 sources I'm using behind Chuba Hubbard, or behind market on Chuba Hubbard. And I'm fine with that. I already thought he was a bad dead zone pick before he was hurt to start the year, and talk about re-injury risk and all that stuff. So there's all these guys that are like buried in my ranks that affect this. I mean, what Mike Washington's ADP is like still, it's ahead of Woody Marks, but like I have Woody Marks buried. And so anyway, the functional side of that is a little bit different, but we'll get into that. We should finish the short view stuff. There's a lot more to talk about. Yeah,
that's one topic down and 36 minutes in. The very last thing I'll just quickly mention, because I don't think I ever clarified, is I had almost the same movement pattern on Jeanty as Gretsch did. So initially I was like, don't draft this guy. Then once the initial sprained ankle report came out, I moved him behind Hall ahead of Love. Once Rappaport came out, clarified that the ankle was more low than high, for whatever that helps, I moved him back up ahead of Hall. I still have him slightly lower than you, I think. Like, I would take Henry and I would take Achane ahead of Jeanty right now.
You would take Henry and Achane. Okay, I have those guys as fades, so I mean it's a little different. I
have Achane as a fade too. I guess really what my point is I would not take Ashton Jeanty in round 2. Is my take.
I did see that. That's why I was, again, the other thing about Washington is I did see that you were viewing Jeanty very similarly in a couple of your updates when I looked at those, sort of after writing mine. And I was surprised, I guess, at the combined optimism, because we were so similar on Jeanty that I felt like I was reading you as more optimistic than me on Washington. Just one more clarification I'm going to do is I did literally just move down Mike Washington in my rankings 5 running back spots, like as we're talking, because I had moved him up so much this morning, and like I'm sure the audience loved like how quiet I got when you were like I'm higher than him, because I didn't really have a response to that. It was literally just confusion, because I was like I thought I moved him up because I was so far behind him, and now I literally had just looked at him versus ADP, and now I'm looking at it and I'm seeing. Maybe I moved him up too high, and so I'm moving him back down. It's literal movement from this morning.
This Jeanty thing, by the way, is like so. I mean, no one cares about like my emotional state, but I'm so annoyed because I mean I had planned to make a healthy Ashton Jeanty like one of the most important pillars of my portfolio. I was so in on this guy, and then now we have an injury that like makes all the teams I've already drafted with him worse, and then B. I don't even think I'm going to draft this guy anymore for like reasons that don't really have to do with my analysis of Ashton Jeanty, but it just seems like the rest of the market, I guess, like cares less about ankle sprains than I do, which is like divorced from the actual profile. So now I feel like I can't even like draft this guy that I spent the entire offseason wanting to draft, but I'm pretty tilted about
it. The ranking discussion we just had in Washington, the way I'm thinking about it is really interesting too, because I have him as a target. The way that I, do different targets and fades. I'm curious the way that you view that part of it too, because I guess I'm saying that I want to stay behind market and maybe he's not a target, but my rankings are for all different sites, and so it's also like I wanted him behind market on like high stakes stuff. I also wanted home leaguers that like people may not be paying attention and might be able to grab Mike Washington really late, and he may actually play a lot in week 1. I do think we'll get information week 1. Like I do think it's an interesting early season play. Like if we get a really surprisingly a bigger role than what I'm currently expecting, and I think more people should be expecting as part of the range of outcomes. But I acknowledge there's a ton of uncertainty, and if we get more work than that, week 2, week 3 would be pretty interesting. And maybe even into the season, he's working in more than we were expecting, and it's more of a headache for Jeanty. I agree with you. I was really excited about Jeanty. That's part of why I don't think, even if we get really optimistic news, I'm going to end up with Jeanty back in that tier. And I think maybe you're right. Maybe I am too optimistic in saying I'd take him in round 2, but there's still this element that I'm thinking of if it really is a low ankle sprain and all that stuff, and we're just getting a discount on a player that I loved in round 1, basically after the first tier of wide receivers and running backs was gone.
I ranked 8th overall.
That's where I was at, basically.
I mean, like I said, he was literally the cover of my draft guide. I think the way that you talked about the home league stuff, I think I'm going to move him up specifically in my home league rankings. I'm in the middle of 4 consecutive main event drafts, and so I think my mind is just in the FFPC format. And I'm like, man, like you have a in a format where, if people aren't familiar, in the FFPC, it's only 4 to 12 teams make the playoffs. It's a 12-week regular season, and really you're looking at 2 out of 12 because you either want to have the highest total points or the best record to advance to the sprint. Otherwise, you're reliant on winning 2 straight games in the playoffs. I'm like, I mean, if Jeanty misses 2 or 3 weeks and then he's performing like a 4th or 5th round pick rather than a 1st round pick for the next 2 or 3 weeks back because he's ramping up, like, and you're trying to finish top 2 out of 12, like, that's a tough round 2 pick, like a really tough round 2 pick. You're making life hard on yourself to the degree that I would say it actually taxes the rest of your roster construction, because if you take him in round 2, then the rest of your draft, you kind of have to think through, okay, how do I backfill my early week running production that I gave up? That's like, are you giving up more upside later in your draft that makes it not worth it to try to get like a very slight discount? So, but when you then bring up like, okay, in a home league where 6 or 8 teams make the playoffs out of 12, you're probably, in no disrespect to the home league community, but you're probably drafting against like softer ADP, softer competitors. You're probably, if you're someone who's listening to this podcast, someone who's paying more attention to the waiver wire or trade market than your average league mates. Like, that's a spot where probably
and the 14-week thing. You mentioned the 12-week thing in FFPC. I completely agree with this take.
Yeah. Yes. I think I should have a larger. I currently have him ranked basically the same in my FFPC rankings as I do in my home league rankings, which I think is clearly inefficient. So I'm going to probably move him back up into the middle of round 2 in the home league rankings. I feel pretty good about like not taking him in round 2 in FFPC.
In high stakes, total. I think I do too. I think I'd rather just take a more aggressive early season play when you only have the 12 weeks. I was pretty specifically talking about. I'd had a conversation this morning, and then when you said you had him ranked around 8, I think I said I that's about where I had him too, or I think that's where I had him too, because I don't do combined rankings. I do individual positions, but then I have done a combined ranking list like a week and a half ago. I just went and checked in both PPR and half PPR. I had him ranked 8th when I did that combined list. I had him RB5. It was just a matter of whether I had him on that list at 8 overall. I now have him RB10. Maybe, I mean, I think that's like you were talking through. Maybe that's better for home leagues and a consideration for home leagues more than it is better for high stakes stuff.
I think so. I mean, the Achane thing actually was probably not as good of a point of me to make to say like I would rank Achane over him, because I'm not taking Travis Achane, Devon Achane anyway. I guess the more meaningful thing is in high stakes leagues, if Jeanty falls to me and I'm picking late 2, and I have the choice of do I take Jeanty or do I take the wide receiver tier of like Neighbors, Collins, London, AJ Brown, I'm taking the wide receivers in round 2 ahead of him, and then I'll take my running back in round 3, be that Hall or Love or Jeanty if he falls a lot, or like, hey, the main event last night we got Henry at the 305, so that was fun. But
wow,
yeah, so that's probably the better way of framing it. I think I'm going to move him back up into the middle of round 2 though in my home league rankings, and ahead of Achane, who I have as a fade. All right. That's 43 minutes, but I think we worked through some good stuff there. All right, here's some other stuff. We got some injury news. Chris Bell likely to play in the preseason. We've got Alec Pierce is potentially going to return to practice next week. And we have Sam LaPorta returning to practice. We got Jordan James returning to practice, though Kalen Black still running as the RB2. That's and then Makai Lemon also is back at practice. We're going to talk about him a little bit later. Any quick thoughts on any of that grouping of positive injury news? Guys who were not practicing, who are now practicing.
I got told that I should have Chris Bell higher in my ranks, or just like a lobby for it. It's kind of funny when people are like, I think you should change your ranks. And it's like lobbying me to like make them more fit there. It's like, they're my ranks. You can change them for your own draft. But the Bell thing, he was like that. He's he was widely considered a round one talent, and it sounds like he's healthy. Chris Bell's profile to me not that strong. It wasn't good until the final year. It was actually pretty underwhelming 3 straight years, and then the last year was good. But you're talking about a 4-year player. It was the 4th year. Underwhelming, I should say, relative to this conversation that he should have been a round one talent. He's not a round one talent analytically to me. I disagree with that premise.
Chris Bell's PR did a lot of. Chris Bell's ACL tear was very bad for Chris Bell, but it did a lot of good for Chris Bell's PR because
suddenly people were like, "This guy's amazing."
Right, like the way Denzel Boston and Omar Cooper were talked about in a lot of circles was like the classic label of, guy who's projected to go in round 1 who everybody denigrates all the time, which is kind of like a thing that happens every year, versus Chris Bell got to be talked of as guy who would have gone round 1, but now he's a discount. Like, if he never tore his ACL and he was actually talked about as round 1 pick, first of all, maybe he wouldn't have been, but if he was, he would have been the guy that all of the data nerds were constantly arguing like shouldn't be going anywhere close to this based on his profile.
Yeah. Didn't have a great profile. And now you're talking about he's in Miami, and he's missed most of the offseason program. It's already hard enough for rookies. I'm already concerned about rookies that are good catching on after all of this missed time. And what's the upside in the Miami passing game, even if he does? Like, you're telling me, because I have him buried. I have him. I did move him up, but I think a little bit. No, actually, I didn't. I have him at wide receiver 89. And I think the take was like he should be in a draftable range. You have him basically undraftable in every format. He's going to be on the waiver wire in every league, even high stakes leagues by week 5. He's not going to play a ton early because he hasn't practiced all offseason. If he starts to show out a bunch and we see positive stuff from Miami's offense, then maybe we'll stash him in week 6 or something, or beyond probably. And maybe we start to see week 10 plus, we start to see dividends. I mean, I would be very surprised if he's a consistent fantasy asset early on. Now, I made that mistake with I thought about this morning when I was responding to this guy. Made that mistake with Quinshon Judkins last year. I was like, Judkins has been out a ton, etc. A little bit different. Judkins was drafted incredibly highly. I also think it's meaningfully different at running back. And he's just a way better prospect. They were ready to give him a lot of work, and he showed that he was, even without being with the team for almost all of August, he was ready for it. I also don't think the logic to kind of fade the guy that had missed all of August was that wrong, and it was just Judkins kind of was the outlier, and yeah, there's a lesson learned there, but I'm not making that bet on Chris Bell and a Dolphins offense. I have no interest in that, but anyway, the other one's pretty straightforward.
I've added him as a priority target round 18 best ball. I think he's completely undraftable in any format where you can get him off waivers.
Makes sense.
Any other guys you want to hit on?
No, I mean, Lemon being back, we're going to talk about. Pierce being back. Yeah. You and I talked about really briefly before the show. We both think I was saying
on
to you
the show sheet for later too.
Okay. I just made a comment to you. I was like, him being back is, if anything, it's not bad for downs, and people are going to think it is. And you were like, if anything, it might even be good. And I think I agree with that take. I mean, he's a positive piece to have on the field for the underneath weapons. And a lot of people are like, well, maybe he's going to get more lower ADOT stuff and everything. The fact that he missed the whole offseason program means that he has not worked on skills that he's never displayed in the NFL. I would strongly believe Alec Pierce, even if with this contract they expect him to do more than he's done, strongly believe 2026 is not going to be the year that happens. Once he's healthy, he's going to be back in his same role from last year as a deep threat. They already brought in Keenan Allen, they have Downs, they have Warren. They have options underneath. He's going to be the field stretcher. He's not a great play himself for fantasy in my mind, but we'll talk about him. LaPorta being back is positive. James being back, I don't know what to do with that RB2 thing, but Black seems like he's in a good spot.
Black seems like the guy right now. Yeah, I'll really briefly on Pierce. I agree with everything that you said. I'm sure the Colts made some overtures to him when they were trying to convince him to re-sign with them that said, hey, we'll feature you more, whatever. I don't think that the Colts would be upset at all if he doesn't add additional work to his game. If he led the NFL in yards per target 2 consecutive years, if he continues to be a super efficient deep player, he's worth the contract. He's a really, really excellent real-life player. He's a really important real-life player, one of the best blocking receivers in the NFL too. I don't think that he needs to add more to be worth it to the Colts. And I don't think the Colts care if a bunch of fantasy players are like, LOL, you paid way too much money for a guy who has 50 catches a season. I don't think that that's a problem the Colts are particularly concerned about. And you also add in Keenan Allen. Now they have Keenan Allen, Josh Downs, and Tyler Warren. You've made this point a million times. If Alec Pierce isn't running the deep routes, who is? What possible concept is better off with Pierce running an intermediate route? Who's running the field stretching routes? Josh Downs? Keenan Allen runs a 4.9? So yeah, I don't think that's a major issue. I think it's big positive though for Jonathan Taylor. Like you can't just have everyone cramped to a line of scrimmage. You need someone who's a threat down the field. So I think it's a big plus for Taylor. Let's do the bad injury news. So guys dealing with injuries. Eli Stowers has been missing practice now with a hamstring issue. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Rachaad White are both missing time with what sounds like minor injuries. They're doing individual work. Rachaad White hilariously, seemingly got injured doing the ice bucket challenge. But sounds like he's already ramping back up, and JCM's doing individual drills. Mike Evans experiencing a groin issue. He's already missed time in camp with a quad issue. So it's the second, hopefully minor soft tissue injury. And then this one's really unfortunate. Trey Benson was waived with an injury designation. He then was not claimed on waivers, which means he reverts to the Cardinals IR before the season, which means he will not be playing football this year, completely ineligible.
No, that's not what it means.
Oh,
he's not ineligible. No. He'll be a free agent. They with the injury designation, they have to reach an injury settlement, and then at least this is my understanding. I can be wrong.
Oh, always. Maybe I'm totally off.
My understanding is they have to reach an injury settlement, and then he reverted to the IR for now. But once they reach an injury settlement, he'll be a free agent, free to sign anywhere. And I think that's crucial for why he didn't get claimed on waivers.
Okay, well, I apologize then for spreading misinformation. Okay.
That's the way that I saw it reported, and is also my understanding with the injury designation. I moved him way up to RB69 and put a target tag back on him because I think it would have been nice if he got claimed. He only has a rookie contract, but it is a round 2 rookie contract. Teams probably think they could get him a little cheaper. They probably want to look at him a little bit before they throw in a claim. They want to look at the health and stuff. I do think there's I don't know how healthy he is or anything. It seems like probably he's not. But when you waive him with an injury designation, you're basic. I think they reach an injury settlement and then he leaves and then he's free to sign. And some of these guys have then played that year for a different organization.
Yeah, I'm looking this up right now, and you're totally right, and I'm wrong. So he's ineligible to play for the Cardinals this year. But yeah, he could reach an injury settlement. They could release him. He could sign someone else if he's healthy. He might not be, but you're right.
If he's healthy, this is the outcome, I think, if you were looking at Trey Benson's peripherals last year and stuff pre-injury. Now, again, he could be unhealthy entirely, but this is the outcome that made Benson interesting, was that he could potentially be the odd man out and get cut. The injury designation basically just means they're not going to have to pay him as much. Like, they're going to get into a settlement and not have to pay him as much. That was kind of always going to be the direction they would go if they cut him, was an injury designation, I think. I don't know that it means that he's definitely not healthy. He may not be. But like I said, I moved him up on this news and made him a target in the last round. I think he's an interesting last round pick for now. Well, because if he lands somewhere really intriguing that is shallow, there's some running back rooms where if he landed, he would get drafted. He would get drafted in round 15, 16, whatever. Yeah. If he landed in Chicago, he's meaningfully more intriguing to me healthy than Kyle Monangai is. And then you're just behind DeAndre Swift. And with Monangai kind of banged up, maybe they need that. If he landed in Minnesota, I'm currently still really interested in Damon Claiborne, but Claiborne didn't look great to me necessarily in the preseason. No. There's not a lot back there. The Josh Jacobs stuff, all you have is Marshawn Lloyd. I mean, what if they took a flyer on Benson and added him to the room? There are basically the whole NFC North. If he was the backup to Jahmyr Gibbs.
Detroit makes a ton of sense. I mean, Petzing has familiarity with Benson, and Pacheco's not healthy. They brought in Kareem Hunt for a workout the other day. Detroit would make a ton of sense for him. Or Connor might get cut still because they might keep Bam Knight ahead of him. So.
And then the Niners, we're just talking about Kalen Black. Totally. If Trey Benson lands there, I'm in. I am so in. They're in division. They've played against this guy before. Maybe they like him. These kinds of things happen, man. So anyway, I'm not hyper into him, but I've moved him up, and I think he's interesting. The Evans groin, I'm hoping is just veteran rest stuff. But are you you said to me before show, you're a little concerned? Is that a little bit of a bigger issue?
I don't know if this is specifically a big issue or not. How could I know? We got a 33-year-old receiver who has now missed time in 3 different stints with 2 different soft tissue injuries. And I don't know that it will be a lost season. I guess what I would say is, if we look back in January, this is how a lost season for a 33-year-old receiver would start. So it's made me pretty concerned. I moved him down below Adams. I moved him below Parker Washington. I moved him below Who's the other guy? There was one other. I moved him below McLaurin, and then I haven't moved him below Watson, DJ Moore, and Rome yet, but I am considering doing that, which would essentially make him completely undraftable if I did that.
I already had him below all those guys, so I'm with you there. The JCM White thing, or no, I had Watson ahead of him. I moved Watson ahead of Evans at the last, as a result of this, but I'm pretty low on both those guys. The last one you mentioned was the Commanders backfield, and just, I guess, really quickly to summarize, because we talked about a pre-show, you and I talked a bit about Kayshon Allen. Neither of us was very impressed by his preseason work. One of the comp that I made to you was the profile reminded me a lot of Myles Gaskin. I'm a UW guy. I can compare a lot of things back to UW, but Myles Gaskin, the deal with him was he was a 4-year player. He set records at UW for total yards, rushing yardage, stuff like that, because he was like a 4-year starter for them. But it didn't have a great athletic profile. He was a compiler. But yeah, I mean, when a guy does that much throughout college, they're able to do a lot of the little things, what have you. But Myles Gaskin was a round 7 pick to the Dolphins. He had a meaningful stint of fantasy production when they had some injuries and they used him enough. He was capable of doing a little bit in an offense for a bit. Then as soon as they got healthy, they were like not interested in using him anymore. They cut him eventually, bounced around. He just retired this month. I saw officially, because he hasn't been able to latch on anywhere for longer than like practice squad reps. People have been fine letting him go on practice squads. No one's ever thought he was a special player worth protecting on their roster over the years. That's sort of how I saw Kayshon Allen, who was a really productive player all throughout college, multiple seasons. I think all 4 years. You'll know better than me. But like the athletic profile is not amazing.
Penn
when
State's
you watch him,
all-time leading rusher.
Yeah, that's probably why I made the Gaskin thing. I remember the Penn State note, and it was like, that's what Gaskin was, the UW all-time leading rusher, and UW's had some studs, but not guys. It's a big part of that is like he was a 4-year contributor, or a 4-year starter. Like UW had Corey Dillon and had Napoleon Kaufman and all these guys, but they didn't play for 4 years, But anyway, the Gaskin comp to Allen, like Allen looked that way, and then you had the interesting note about the quote you heard, but basically it's like the way I read that quote is like they were thinking about cutting him until they saw him in the preseason. But
yeah, this is from Cody Main from ETR had aggregated a Dan Quinn quote that basically the staff planned to put him in as many scenarios as possible in the preseason. That's why they gave him so many reps, because they felt his physicality profile was harder to evaluate in practice. And like, I don't know how to read that in a bullish manner. Like, that feels like a nice way of saying this guy looked like shit in practice.
Yeah, like every other running back looked way better than him.
Like,
and
the nice way of phrasing it is like, this guy has a theoretical advantage that I haven't seen yet, so we put him in a different scenario so that maybe we would see it. Like, that's how I.
And then he wasn't
read
good.
That quote.
And then in the preseason he was very average.
I thought he looked sluggish. I thought he had runs where he like ran into his lineman and didn't even show particularly good vision, which you would think is like theoretically a strength of a veteran guy. I mean, here's my comps for him from back in the pre-draft process. I had Brian Robinson, Jordan Howard, Audric Estime, Chris Rodriguez, which like kind of paints a picture of like, in a positive scenario, like maybe this guy could Jordan Howard his way to like a couple of years of a lot of relevance with touches. And in
same
a
thing
less
with the
positive
Myles
scenario, he's Audric Estime and is literally never heard from again outside of like popping up for a game or two. So yeah, it's I everything I've seen from Kayshon Allen so far, and like I could be wrong. I don't think he's like a terrible last round pick or anything on an ambiguous backfield, but everything I've seen so far has affirmed my off-season long enthusiasm for both JCM and Rachaad White. And I'd also add that all of the quotes I've seen on the backfield, like all the Coach Speak Index stuff, and Ben Standig's been writing a ton, and Standig has been like writing a lot about what kind of Washington's goals are for the backfield. And what they've talked about is it's kind of this balancing aspect between they want JCM's explosiveness, but they also want a running back who can stay on the field in all situations so that they're not tipping plays and they can play with the pace they want to play with and not constantly sub guys on and off. And if JCM can prove he's that guy, he'll be the guy. And if not, then maybe Rachaad White would be the guy. Like, to me, if what they're looking for in a running back is a combination of explosiveness and all situation usage, like Kayshon Allen is neither explosive nor a pass catcher. So he's not the answer to either of those elements.
Yep. Other news.
All right, let's run through the rest here. So you mentioned already, or we mentioned already, Trey Benson, who's a potentially interesting cut candidate. And apologies again to the listeners for getting some of the rules wrong. So I'm glad you were all over it. There's other interesting cut candidates around the league too. DJ Giddens has been left off the final roster projection from Stephen Holder and from James Boyd, who I would consider probably the two most reliable Colts beat reporters. Caleb Johnson has also been left off a lot of roster projections, and then James Conner's roster spot is in question. So there's a bunch of running back potential cuts, and then another one is Sean Tucker. There was a report that he's in a legitimate roster battle with, I think his name was Josh Williams. I'm not going to lie, I'd not heard of this other guy. I don't know if you had heard of him until like a day ago, but he was not a guy that's on my radar. The Tucker news would be interesting because, honestly, it might be good for him to get caught. Maybe he could be an RB2 instead of an RB3. But that also gave me a lot of optimism on Irving and Gainwell. What do you make of all these potential cut candidates, and in particular the Tampa backfield, if Tucker is either cut or not cut, but just deprioritized?
Well, first of all, don't ever apologize to the listeners for not knowing some esoteric, or I don't know if esoteric's even the right word. I don't know how to use words, but some crazy NFL word. The rules around salary caps, all that stuff are so challenging, and people love to be like, you do this for a living and you don't even know that one thing. And I promise you, if you did it for a living, you would not be able to keep all of it perfectly straight. I spend all my waking hours doing this stuff. The thing about the NFL is it is a very complicated league to follow and to parse, and there's things that are going to be missed. And anyway, I've done that a million times, and there will be a million that I do it on too. So I don't want to get in the habit of apologizing for not knowing things. But the Sean Tucker thing, just to clarify that point, specifically the nuanced things, those things happen. The Sean Tucker one is interesting to me. I have been pretty out on him. I wouldn't have expected him to be a cut candidate. I guess I don't think that's actually going to happen, but I don't think he's draftable, and I never really thought he did. I've been way behind market on him since my initial ranks. I have this little tool that I built that compares it to ADP, my ranks to ADP, and I've been way behind market on him, and I've just been fine with that. Because how was he I never really knew what the path was with him when you see the Gainwell signing, and Gainwell's whole strength is that he can do everything, and Tucker, they've been really unwilling to give nuance to work to in a lot of different ways, and so he's one that I haven't been super thrilled on. The McGowan thing, I moved him up quite a bit in the ranks. I'm starting to take that serious. There's some positive stuff. Holder had a positive tweet on him. The problem is the positive tweet came during the game, and then I went back through the preseason and watched all the games because I read up preseason stealing signals. He did not look good in the preseason. And then I went back to Holder's tweet because I knew it came during the game, and he said he started this game well. And so I didn't know where they were at in the game when he tweeted it. I just saw it on social. I assume he tweeted it after the first or second touch, and maybe he showed a little burst on those first couple touches. He played quite a lot in that game, and there was really not a lot that was that interesting for him. I'm taking the Giddens negativity and even the McGowan positivity because he's a rookie who I think these rookies are not going to get pass protection work in a lot of cases and a lot of that stuff. I think it's tough. I think defenses are more complicated. We've talked about this. The stuff they're doing in the front five is tough for offensive lines, and I think teams are more likely to use the veteran running backs and pass protection and all that stuff. Jonathan Taylor ran 400 plus routes by PFF's numbers, his first season by PFF's numbers, over 300 last year. That's what we're looking for again. And I think you said this when I brought it up a couple shows ago. You were like, Jonathan Taylor's live to run the most routes of any, or play the most snaps of any running back in the league. I hear this and I'm like, Taylor's never coming off the field, which is a good thing.
I think McGowan, I moved him into a draftable range as a late round guy, as a pure contingent bet on a running back who, obviously Taylor playing a gazillion snaps makes you want to draft Taylor. It does increase the chances he gets injured if he's playing literally 100% of the snaps. And I think McGowan could be the contingent rusher. Giddens, prospect I really liked. He really struggled in pass pro situations last year, ended up losing him the RB2 job to Amir Abdullah over the course of the season, and he's missed the majority of training camp with a hamstring injury that he then re-aggravated. It's just a tough run out for him. He could maybe be interesting somewhere else if he does get cut, or maybe they keep him and start him on IR or something. The only other running back they have that's really in the mix is this guy Ulysses Bentley, who has looked fun in the preseason, but I don't think he's much of a prospect at all. I personally would expect the Colts to claim some like pass pro specialist running back. They did this last year with Amir Abdullah. They got him late. I would keep an eye on like Dare Gumbawale. If Tyler Goodson was to not make the Falcons, he's been with the Colts before. If Abdullah was, I forget where Abdullah's on the Jags right now. If he doesn't make the Jags, he might come back to the Colts. Like I think one of these like 30-year-old guys who somehow managed to stay in the league exclusively for pass protection and special teams reasons, I think is going to end up being the Colts' third running back and third down back, I would guess. I just don't think it'll be like Jonathan Taylor and a 7th-round rookie and a UDFA. Like that would seem like a weird running back roster to me. What else we got here? We've got Kayshon Boutte trade. He goes to Houston. Your thoughts if this makes him interesting, how it affects the other receivers on the roster, and your thoughts on the Houston Texans.
Yeah, I think he's good for like the Texans roster. I didn't really know what they were gonna do. They went and signed Sterling Shepard and Zay Jones like right away. I think that kind of was a little under the radar, and then they now have made the Boutte trade. I think like at this point, if you're still thinking Tank Dell, I think they are hoping to get 100 routes out of Tank Dell. I don't think they're thinking he's anywhere going to be near fantasy
John
relevant.
McClain said Tank Dell is nowhere close to playing football, and he had mentioned him as they hope they can have him in full strength for 2027. It's enough already with the Tank Dell stuff.
We're still there. Wow. Oh my God. We're still like, I say that from the perspective of, I thought he's had a really bad offseason. I called him the worst pick and said he was undraftable like a month ago, and people were still drafting him pretty high. When I say we're still there, like by the end of August, we're talking about him like we were talking about him last offseason, which is that he's going to miss the whole year and maybe next year. It sucks because Tank Dell is a fun player, and I'm not trying to be negative, but when he says they're hoping to get him for full strength for next year when he's already had 2 years off since the injury, like the guy's career is probably just done, sadly. I would have hoped that we weren't there. That like he could at least run 100 routes.
I'm rooting for him. Like we're all rooting for him. I mean, the injury was horrible, and I would love to be wrong about this. But yeah, this is John McClain's exact tweet. I pulled it up. It says, Kayshon Boutte will be on a season-long audition for his next team. The Texans will get back Jaden Higgins, who's missing the season with a torn ACL in 2027. They should also have a full-speed Tank Dell by next season too. Hopefully sooner, but he's nowhere near ready to play.
That's rough. Anyway, yeah, the fact that they responded to Jaden Higgins being out by going out and signing 2 dusty veterans to bring into camp, and then also trading for Boutte, I think was evidence enough that. And then it's also, I mean, the Jalen Noel thing, like he's interesting, but he's a slot receiver. He's not going to play the role that Higgins is playing. And so anyway, Boutte's going to play. He's going to play, and I think he's going to play like fast. And he's a good vertical receiver, despite the draft capital the trade capital that the Patriots got back. I'm laughing because I was thinking of Pat Thorman, who's been saying all along, like, there's no reason to just trade him. You know, he's a good player. Like we have him on the roster depth is a good thing. And then, you know, they just traded him for nothing.
For literally nothing.
Maybe they really like that safety. I don't know what the deal is there, but Boutte, vertical receiver, should play. And then I moved Nico Collins up. I moved him back ahead of George Pickens. I think you could arguably take him over London. I think Nico Collins it's still a tricky offense and situation, but I think he's in a situation to really earn a lot of volume. I told you, I think on the last show maybe, that I had moved Dalton Schultz up a little bit on the Higgins injury. I moved him back down a few spots, but I still have him ahead of ADP when I was checking that tool earlier, and I think that's right.
How come
I think
down?
He's a target. Down because before they actually traded for Boutte, I thought there was no competition for a meaningful second target share on the team. Like, again, I'm really low on Dell, and I thought they were going to be playing Xavier Hutchinson, and so now you go from Hutchinson to Boutte. Like, Boutte's going to, I understand your point. Boutte's the vertical routes is going to help.
Hutchinson and Boutte have the exact same career targets per route run, for what it's worth.
Yeah, but Boutte could be productive. He's way more efficient on the deep stuff. He has it at a higher ADOT as well. I have to imagine. I don't have that number in front of me, but
is that bad for Schultz? Like, if you're replacing Xavier Hutchinson, who has a 13% targets per route run, in a way that doesn't help the team sustain offense and operates in the same area of the field as Schultz, and you replace that with a guy who also doesn't draw targets but does help sustain offense and operates in a different area of the field from Schultz, I view that as an upgrade for Schultz.
I think it's more. I don't know that I view it as an upgrade. I understand the way that you're seeing it and the way that you're framing it. There's the potential for Boutte to actually make plays, and the more like efficient plays that are in a passing game, the fewer passes. Then you wind up ahead in games. Then you run the ball more. So like anytime you have another receiver that can make explosive play, so it's not purely the targets per out run. It's like this guy's going to produce. He's going to gain yards. If he has 50-yard catches, like C.J. Stroud's not going to throw for 500 yards. He's not going to. And a lot of what Schultz gets is like, 2-minute drill type stuff, underneath stuff. When defenses get into like sit back mode, then they like hit Schultz underneath. His ADOT actually fell last year. He's a lot older. I hear your point. I just think sort of on base downs and those things. The other thing is I don't know that. The targets per out run in the New England offense will port directly over to what his situation now with Houston. I think it'll probably be higher this year, actually. And so, like, Hutchinson, we had a good idea, wasn't a target earner in this offense in this situation. Boutte, they go out and acquire, and they were, I think they were planning to use Higgins in a pretty aggressive way and sort of have him high up on the progression list on a lot of play calls. He's the number 2 target on this play and this design. And maybe Boutte wasn't that as often in New England. We know that deep threats are often like sacrificial. I think dropping Boutte into what they were already planning for Higgins, and they're going to have to like basically drop him into that role, is going to lead to more like early progression looks, more maybe first read looks, and potentially a bump in his targets per out run. I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen, but that's sort of like the way that I would describe the stats that you gave and why I still see it as like neutral to a downgrade. The reason I moved Schultz so far up was like, if they're just running Xavier Hutchinson and all these guys out there, I thought Schultz could be like top 5 in targets at the tight end position. Like just get a ton of targets, and it's like, all right, well, I can't have him at tight end 20 if he's going to be top 5 in targets at the tight end position. He may still have a lot of volume. I hear your point. I think your logic is fine.
Shit ton of volume. Yeah, and I think
I'm still ahead of ADP.
Okay, yeah, I think Schultz is a major priority target, and I think Nico Collins, he jumped AJ Brown and Drake London in my rankings off of the Higgins stuff. I've always been a big Nico Collins fan, but I think he has a legitimate chance of leading the NFL in target share this year. He's going to be running all of his routes next to 2 receivers who have a career.
Did you just say you moved him ahead of London too?
Yeah, I moved him ahead of London. I moved him ahead of AJ Brown, and then
AJ Brown.
Yeah, and I moved Malik. I moved Malik ahead of him now based on the more positive news. But Nico Collins.
So you're really low on AJ Brown. You have him like wide receiver 9.
I don't know if that's really low, but I do have him wide receiver 9. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean he's just like one of the greatest receivers of this generation. It would be absurd to rank him anywhere lower than wide receiver 1 overall. No,
you have him wide receiver 1 overall. I love AJ. I mean, it's a tier that I like mix and match a little bit because I don't like. It's not a setup where if I have one team for my life, I would take Nico over Brown. But I don't like feel it to the degree where I would want like 5 Nicos and 0 Browns. In any respect. So I've drafted some AJ Brown for sure. I drafted a ton of AJ Brown before he was traded to New England. I guess if I'm viewing these two situations, so AJ Brown's true upside almost certainly higher because he plays with Drake May. I feel better about Nico from like a floor and from a talent upside, or at least from a talent like median perspective. Just younger, not coming off of a down season. I don't have any concerns about like a chronic knee injury. So I probably view him as a bit safer. And I do think there's a ton of upside. Like this is a guy that we drafted 1-2 turn last year. had 2 ridiculously efficient seasons, is downgraded last year because Stroud looked rough, and that's fair that our kind of range of outcomes on Stroud would change. But his situation's unbelievably amazing. I mean, you mentioned maybe Boutte's targets per run comes up a bit, but like again, the 2 guys I think that will run the next most routes after Collins in this offense are Boutte and Hutchinson, who both have a 13% career targets per route run, and I expect them to be near the top of the league in 12 and 13 personnel usage. Schultz is like a target earner-ish, but not a great one, and every other tight end they're going to use is probably a blocker. So, I mean, there's going to be a ton of chances where Nico Collins, like one of the best receivers in the NFL, running a bunch of routes next to like replacement level players, like constantly, which is interesting to me.
Nico did see his like yards per out run profile come down a little bit, I believe, for the second straight year. I had some like minor concerns in field tippers that I don't. Yeah, so he was at in 2023 when he broke out 3.10 yards per out run PFF. Then 2024 2.87, still up there by 3. Last year 2.35, still very, very good, but his targets per out were down. His yards per target was down, and it had been really exceptional the 2 years prior, so he kind of got hit on both sides of it. I agree with everything you're saying with Nico generally. Just to like add some color to my AJ Brown, like obviously joking that he would be wide receiver 1. I have him ranked right at ADP on NFC and FFPC at wide receiver 7, so it's not like I'm crazy high. I do have him in a tier above all these guys, in the tier with Lamb and Jefferson, and I have it that way in part because ADP does have it similar to that. At NFC, I'm seeing a 14.9 ADP this week, and all of the other receivers outside the top 21. So London comes in next. Nico might move up a little, but he's at 23.3. There's a pretty big gap there all the way at the back end at the 2-3 turn as opposed to the first half of round 2. At FFPC, where the tight ends go a little higher, AJ Brown's at 19.7. All the other wide receivers after that are after 23. So you get at least a 3.5 pick gap between AJ Brown at wide receiver 7 and again it's London at wide receiver 8. On Underdog, on Underdog he has an 18.3. It's a little bit of a narrower. No, it's still about 3.5 picks. 3.5 picks. 21.9 is the next from 18.3. It's a little wider gap between Brown and Justin Jefferson on Underdog than it is on the high stakes platforms based on maybe it's similar gap on FFPC. On NFFC, it's closer. That's a 3 wide receiver format where the wide receivers get pushed up a little bit. So anyway, Brown, I think having him at wide receiver 9, I do think is a you'll never get him, which is fine. But I'll never get him.
I'll never get him if I draft exactly off of my rankings every time. I guess.
So you're not fading him. That's what I was trying to get. You're not
I'm fading him a little in that like I'm going to be like slightly. Well, I won't be underweight because I was so overweight like really early. But like basically since he's climbed up to this ADP, I've been slightly underweight. But what I would be saying is like I genuinely like Nico Collins more. If I drafted one team and I had the choice, I would take Nico Collins. If I'm drafting a variety of teams, I'm not clicking that every single time. Like I would mix in an AJ Brown share because I definitely see the ceiling there for sure. Is probably how I would put it. So like in like best ball, like I would want something like 12% Nico Collins, 6% AJ Brown or something. I mean, part of the way I'm trying to phrase this too is like, so I have like Achane ranked pretty decisively below consensus. So I'm taking this whole group of wide receivers above him. That kind of changes some things. I've moved Jeanty way down. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm at. But
that's what I was trying to get at.
Certainly not zeroing AJ Brown, which I like. Yeah, I would zero AJ Brown if I import my rankings into like a little Dalmatian and I auto draft 101 of them. But like, I'm going to exercise some free will and move it around a little bit. Yeah.
One of the that's what I was getting at. I was trying to understand exactly where you're at on Brown, because it felt like you were meaningfully lower to have 2 guys behind that little bit of what, like it's an ADP tier break ahead of him. But you're not saying that you're like completely out on Brown. You're really optimistic about the other guys. I get that. One of the other things I'll note is there's always this element of this time of year. You have the best ball, and we talked about this I think on the show so far. But the best ball market, it gets really anchored because it's been a certain way all season. I like to use the high stakes stuff this time of year that's going to be a little bit more fluid. Nico is wide receiver 8. You'll know better than me because I haven't been drafting underdog all offseason, but I assume he's been wide receiver 8. But like the next guy behind, he's there. Him and Drake London are both at 21.9 on underdog. They're like wide receiver 8.
London's been
been
falling though. London was like ahead of him for most of the season.
He was ahead of him,
and he's been falling. Yeah.
But Nico's been ahead of Pickens. He's been ahead of Neighbors. He's been ahead of all those guys in best ball. On NFFC, he's at wide receiver 11. Yeah. On FFPC, he's at wide receiver 10. So on the 2 high stakes formats right now, even if he rises, it's a commentary on, or it's like, it's not about him passing Brown, who's sort of the next guy up. It's about, can he pass multiple guys to get to Brown and then potentially pass Brown? And I'm not like trying to say that changes your take. You can be super high on Collins. It's maybe it's more context for the listeners. It's maybe more context for you. Sometimes I miss these little notes on ADP that Collins is viewed more aggressively where you've done more of your drafting than he's been viewed so far in the high stakes formats. I think he's going to rise. I'm with you.
Yeah,
I think he's like,
I'll concede that. I mean, I've been vocal and I strongly believe he's undervalued in the high stakes stuff. He's him flipping London is really recent. London's been ahead of him for most of the offseason in underdog, and I think it's a combination of the Higgins news being good for Nico and the Tua losing a quarterback competition to no one. It seems like he's been the only quarterback able to practice, and they still won't name him the starter because he's been so bad. And then Neighbors on underdog, I know his ADP is behind those guys. Like anecdotally, he's going ahead of these guys, and I think it's like an ADP lag. Like if you were to draft 25 Best Ball Mania teams today on underdog, I would bet heavily that Neighbors goes ahead of Collins and London.
It's interesting because Neighbors goes wide receiver 12 over on NFC, and he's wide receiver 9 on FFPC. One of the bigger gaps between the two, like higher stakes formats. I think the NFC.
That's about the extra receiver slot.
I mean, potentially. I think the NFC audience, I found this, the idea of like slappies and boomers, I found the NFFC drafters to be a little bit more on the sort of boomer side, which may mean, in this case, like being a little bit less or a little bit more concerned about health and those things and just into different types of players. There are some like significant, and so a lot of FFC players, PVC players are going to be people that like a lot of streamers and stuff and people that play on underdog and those things. So I think you get some of these gaps where it's a little bit of a population of like who's drafting on the sites. It's what's the word I'm trying to think of? It's like if we took a census, like it's more of about what types of drafters there are. Hayden Winks famously did the research a couple years ago about how 0RB drafters were more likely to take like young and exciting wide receivers, and like people who took a lot of running backs early were more likely to take the more stable veteran wide receivers. And it was like hilarious to see that a completely unrelated running back draft strategy affected which type of receiver they were drafting. There's multiple ways to play fantasy football. I think there's a little bit of a gap here on these two sites about what is the more dominant thing. But then ADP reinforces itself within sites the way that I'm not saying underdog's ADP is wrong. The only reason the ADP like anchoring effect exists on underdog is it's been drafted on all year. Everything's been discussed. Everything's been compared. And so there is a little bit more like robustness from the people that are actually on that site and drafting there a lot. Whereas a lot of the people that are drafting on NFC, FFPC, some of the more seasonal sites, they just pick up drafting in the more recent months, and they're more willing to be flexible to changes and those things because they haven't been doing it as long. They haven't been reinforcing these things as long. And so it's, if anything, it could be argued as a positive for underdog. Although I think one of the challenges with that is there's a lot of information coming in right now, and things probably should shift pretty rapidly in August, and it's tough. I have a take that in the best ball ADP gets anchored to throughout the year, and it's not as reactive in August as it should be because of that. And therefore, like I tend to look at the other stuff more meaningfully right now because it's moving and shifting a little bit more.
That's fair.
But yeah, every site's going to have its own like ecosystem. So it's interesting stuff. Anyway.
All right, I'm going to whip through the rest of our short view topics here. So another little piece of injury stuff, and it's a bit of a Travis Hunter note as well. So Jakobi Meyers, Brian Thomas Jr., Parker Washington at various times have missed some practice time. Doesn't sound like there's serious doubt about week 1 for any of them. Washington's already back practicing in full. But the note is that even despite those injuries, Travis Hunter has spent less time playing on offense, more time playing on defense than he was earlier in camp. And then another interesting one to me, this one I feel as though has been like misevaluated by the market. So I'm really curious to hear your take, which is that Dave Canales came out. They asked him about the running back situation. He said they're hopeful to have Chuba Hubbard back for week 1, but he said it would be a running back by committee. He said that he specifically said each series will have someone doing the early down and someone doing the base, someone doing the base down work, someone doing the pass down work. He said it would be TBD on who that lead guy would be. Curious for your take on any of the Hunter stuff, and then curious for your take on how to interpret that quote and how you're drafting the Carolina running backs.
I have Chuba as a pretty big fade. Chuba Hubbard was really good in college. He was an interesting prospect, but he had a significant injury and he wasn't as great the last year. And then he had a little bit of a slow start, but was like a guy that people liked a little bit in the dynasty community as like, oh, there's an interesting profile underneath here. The first couple years he plays 32 games. Looks like he had 786 yards from scrimmage as a rookie, which is a good amount for a day 3 rookie. 637 the next year. And was a little more efficient. And then year 3 is when he breaks out. He has 1,100 yards. Year 4, 2024, he has 1,300 yards. And that's where like we get into this, like Chuba Hubbard is a meaningful like fantasy player, like stretch of his career. Well, that was already his age 24, 25 season. Last year was age 26. He is 27 now, turned 27 in June. And I don't think people realize how old he is. I mean, he's not like old, but like a day 3 back being really good late into their 20s. And like we talk about, like, yeah, guys can produce past age 30. Derrick Henry can. But like, is Chuba Hubbard really such a meaningful player that he's going to be super productive late into his 20s? I don't know. When you get into the older ages with running backs, you want to be a year early rather than a year late. I think that's meaningful. He now has a hamstring injury. That stuff can meaningfully recur in season. And then there's the other part that last season at age 26, a lot of these guys that are this type of profile, like a good but not great running back, they're good until they're like 25, and then they're not anymore. It's like it's a younger age out. It's just the reality of it all. One of the things working for Chuba is they really like him, and they talked about him favorably last year about like Canales is talking about how much they love him in the building and stuff. But the concern I have is that that's going to work in his favor, but that he's just not a meaningful enough player. Now, Jonathan Brooks being a real injury concern or like a health related concern or whatever is reason to still think of Chuba as like draftable. He's like a handcuff, but it's not a good offense. And look, I know he's going to get more work than a handcuff early in the year. I'm not trying to say that's all he is a handcuff. He's going to play early in the year because they're not going to go into the season and give Jonathan Brooks 80% of the snaps. My point is Chuba got outplayed by Rico Dowdle just last year, like outplayed. And Rico Dowdle took over the role. Like Jonathan Brooks, if he's anything like what his profile says, Jonathan Brooks' profile, very strong from college. I know it's like a lot of it's per touch and he didn't have a massive workhorse role. But like my expectation would be that Jonathan Brooks is going to look like the better player at the NFL level. Maybe after 2 ACL tears, he won't. I mean, there's a lot of like, but anyway, I'm playing Jonathan Brooks somewhat aggressively. I don't want to be like way overexposed to this player. He's obviously incredibly risky. But again, I've mentioned this stat a few times. His evasion rate, his evasion rate was slightly better than Jeremiah Love's. His yards after contact per attempt, his breakaway run rate, his yards per out run are all stats that I look at in a college prospects collegiate profile. We're all just like a half step lower than Jeremiah Love's. Love did it on a lot more work. But like that's why Jonathan Brooks was the top running back in his class 2 years ago. They drafted him despite an ACL tear in round 2. They ended up having to have him basically redshirt all of 2025. But one of the reasons I've been so out on Tank Dell is like compared to Jonathan Brooks, they sat him the whole year and Jonathan Brooks was ready to go at the start of camp. And they were like, he's fully healed. He's ready to go. We're going to have him go through camp like normal. They're playing him in the preseason. They don't have concerns about where he's at. They had a plan. They sat him for a year. They made sure he's healthy. He's now 2 years removed from that second ACL tear. The doctors we're optimistic. One of the ones on, I'm so bad with the Twitter doctors, giving them proper credit, and I apologize. Hopefully you know where this report came from, but one of them talked about how they were able to use the same the same hole that was drilled in the bone when they have to redo an ACL. They drill a hole in the bone that they did in the first ACL tear, and the one that he had in college when they fixed this 2 years ago after he retore it at Carolina, and that there was a technique they did on the first one that was like not as high of a success rate, and so it's not that surprising that it retore, but the fact, and then so they did a better technique the second time at the NFL level, but the fact that they were able to reuse that drilled hole spoke favorably about the way his knee had like recouped basically, and like it's not like sometimes there can be like cartilage or issues, I guess, but like it seems like it's fairly clean that they had to redo it, but it was just a poorly done ACL the first time, and then they redid it and it's like ready to go now, or that's the hope. He's 2 years removed. They're playing him in the preseason. Like I'm willing to take the risk on Brooks's health. And then from a talent-based perspective, it's not a week one role perspective. Like this idea that they're going to split in week one is fine, because I'm betting Jonathan Brooks is going to look meaningfully better than this mostly just a guy, 27-year-old running back who got dunked on by Rico Dowdle last year. Like Jonathan Brooks is a potentially very special young back. If they're playing alongside each other 50-50, it's going to shift Brooks' way over time. That's the way I'm playing it. I could be wrong, obviously, but that's the way I'm playing it.
I'll go short on this one, and it's just the reaction to the quote to me makes no sense. So what's happened was, like, early in the offseason, Chuba was getting drafted ahead of Brooks. Then they got drafted pretty evenly, and particularly after Hubbard suffered the hamstring injury that put his week one availability in some level of doubt, Brooks jumped him, and the gap has widened substantially, especially in some of the high stakes stuff. I think that gap is correct and efficient. Because Brooks has now been going ahead of Hubbard, I've seen a lot of the like Hubbard bulls or Hubbard supporters put that quote up as like bullish for Chuba Hubbard. Like, you know, the guy that you're drafting 3 rounds ahead of Chuba Hubbard, actually they're in a committee. That to me is crazy. You mentioned how much they like Chuba Hubbard as a person, as a part of the team. He's a captain on this team. He's been their starting running back. I know it's like he lost a job at times, but he's been a fixture of their offense for years. He's like a culture guy in their team. The easy answer when asked, who is your starting running back, the guy who's a captain on your team or the guy who has 9 career NFL carries, the easy answer is Chuba Hubbard. Even if you don't believe it, that's the easy answer. So my expectation, even as a person who's had Brooks ranked above Chuba for most of the season, was not that Brooks had like almost any shot of being a clear lead back in week one, and I would have been surprised if it was 50-50 week one. My expectation was Chuba's going to be a pretty decisive 1A, if not just a 1 in week one, and that Brooks is going to have to close this to 50-50, and then he's going to have to separate. If we're already at the stage of where it's 50-50 or where Brooks could even be the lead week one, I find that surprising, and I find that remarkably bullish for Brooks. I think Brooks deserved to be drafted ahead of Hubbard meaningfully, even with an expectation that Hubbard would project better in week one. The fact that there's any doubt about that, to me, means the gap even needs to widen, not shrink, in my perspective.
Makes sense.
All right. Couple quick hits left. These ones about quarterbacks. You have been watching the preseason. You've been writing up the awesome preseason stealing signal stuff. 2 quarterbacks who I would not say had a great preseason. One is Deshaun Watson. He was recently named the starter. And then Cam Ward, he has had some issues. At least a lot of people perceive it that way in the preseason. And we've seen his ADP, Cardinal Tate's ADP fall as a result. What are your thoughts on Watson and Ward?
Ward's at least a gunslinger. He'll attack areas. I think I've been lower than market on Tate for the most part, or lower than I typically am on rookies of this sort. I guess I'm not as concerned about the Ward side of it than I already was. Like, I mean, like, he's obviously not a perfect quarterback. He had a really rough rookie year. The idea that he's going to be so bad as to sink Tate is not. I mean. Well, I don't know. I guess maybe that's the way people are going to look at it in the end, is that Ward sunk Tate. But my concern was that Tate had very specific production. But anyway, Ward does not look good. They have 5 catchless targets between them. I do think they're going to hit for some splash plays. Ward's got a big arm. He's willing to make some aggressive throws, and he does throw some balls decently. It's not like he's like completely inaccurate. To my eye, so one catch that Tate could have brought in the last game went off his fingertips and probably could have been dropped in with a little bit more touch. Tate had a little bit of space. To my eye, most of the targets that he's earned and gotten have not been, there's been like no separation. He's run like some quick outs where there's a defender right on him, and Ward's just thrown it like, to the boundary, out of bounds. But like Tate does not look like a guy who's ready to earn targets in the short to intermediate range in the preseason, which is what the prospect profile was like one of the concerns. And I'm not saying can't happen during the rookie year, but you would like to have seen it in the preseason if he was going to be playing. You would have liked to see it the way that we've seen it with DeJon Stribling and some of these other rookies that are going out and just immediately getting open and catching passes all the time. And my point is I wouldn't put that all on Ward. But anyway, Ward has not played well. The Deshaun Watson point, completed 5 of 12 passes. He played the second half against like third stringers. Because I think they were playing the Bills or whoever they were playing, like didn't really even play starters.
The Bills.
Yeah,
they're playing the Bills, and
starters.
Shedeur started the first half, so it was like,
you're into third stringers by the second half. 5 of 12. He's also throwing to none of his guys. None of the guys were in there. I understand that side of it as well. He did complete some decent passes in the first couple drives of the first preseason game when he was playing with the first team, and they like scored a touchdown. Casey Concepcion had the rushing TD at the end of that drive, but then he got strip sacked, and then he like looked like he started sucking after he got strip sacked. It was like, I feel like it's a confidence thing with him, which is just karmic justice. I love that he like hates that he's getting booed. Like, you deserve to get booed. And I love that you are so fragile that it's affecting you, because whatever, we have to watch you. And anyway, that's neither here nor there, but like my personal opinion on him. The 5 for 12 in game 2, I wanted to note 3 of those completions were wide receiver quick hits, immediate throws to the wide receiver behind the line of scrimmage. He completed 2 passes vertically down beyond above the line of scrimmage. One, he had a wide open crosser, threw low. The guy had to go down to the ground. It was a completion. It was a reasonable enough throw down the field. The other was on and then the next ball he threw across the line of scrimmage that got caught by the Bills. He threw an interception trying to get vertical, and then he completed a second pass on a 2nd and 9, 5-yard stop where the corners were playing off. It was 24-7 in the fourth quarter. He got a 5-yard completion. They tackled him right away. 3rd and 4 or whatever. Like they were basically giving him that. That's all he completed vertically across the line of scrimmage on 12 throws. Now some of those throws were not throws beyond the line of scrimmage. He didn't throw 12 balls beyond the line of scrimmage, but he had multiple others beyond the line of scrimmage that either looked like they were thrown into traffic or thrown like wide of guys. And it's not to say that Shedeur Sanders was perfect. He threw a pick on a ball that was behind the receiver, went off the receiver's hands over the middle. You can't really be late. But he did make some good throws as well. Sanders was like 9 for 11 or 9 for 12 or something, and he completed some balls downfield. He also looked like he was holding the ball quite a while in the pocket. It does seem like the contract is why Watson is playing. He's getting paid a ton of money. But I just was going to point out that Watson looked bad, and seems rattled about all this stuff. Now they're going to be on the road the first 2 games, so he doesn't have to get booed by his home crowd. So maybe that's going to be, I don't know, better for him. If he's good, it's because the skill players around him are actually really good, and he hasn't gotten to play with them. Like I think that week 1 preseason note is reasonable. That like when you had Concepcion out there, when you had good players out there, like he was able to complete some balls. Maybe those guys will create separation enough, but I think it could be really bad for the Browns. And my biggest actionable thing here, I mean, one is like I don't want to have to be playing Concepcion or like Fannin, and Fannin you're going to play if you draft them, but I don't love having to play those guys early in the year. 2 is I'm playing the Jacksonville Jaguars DST.
Oh my God, yeah.
They're the late round DST to pick. They have a bad week 2 matchup, but week 1 they're at home against the Browns.
They're a great one, and if you can't get the Jags because they're climbing up, my favorite D that is available every time in the last round is Tampa, because they play the Bengals week 1, which historically the week 1 Bengals are like the worst team in the NFL, even though they're a really good offense. But then they get the Browns week 2, so you can find your way through the Bengals. No one wants to stream against the Bengals, but they're actually not that terrible, especially like on FFPC where points don't matter. So, and it's just about sacks and turnovers. Like the Bengals throw 1 million pass attempts. And then you get the Browns without any sort of bidding exercise week 2.
And then you get Kyler at home week 3. The problem is it's at the Bengals. I don't necessarily love banking. I mean, those types of trends, historically the Bengals are terrible in week 1, but like At some point, Joe Burrow and the gang are going to
Yeah,
be like,
I just think the Bengals,
week.
like, even though they're a good offense, I never mind streaming defenses against the Bengals because Joe Burrow always takes sacks. It depends. If you're in a league where, like, points allowed matters a lot, then it's potentially worse. But if points allowed is pretty immaterial, then, like, the
They'll
Bengals
have a
will
high
take
pass
sacks,
rate.
they'll throw picks because they're always throwing. So you don't even need, anyway. Mostly it's like, I think the Bengals are like a secretly not that terrible offense to stream defenses against, and then you get the absolute GOAT streaming matchup against the
What do you think?
Contested.
So one of the ones I took, and they didn't. It was like last round. They didn't go high in this draft. I took the Ravens because they're at the Colts. Do you think starting at Daniel Jones in his first game back from an Achilles is a? Because then they go after the Colts. They go Saints.
I'm not objective about this, but I mean I was very low on the Daniel Jones signing. I thought we should have moved on. I mean, it has been so uniform how amazing he's been at camp that I've kind of come all the way around, and I'm all the way
that's a
back
bad
in
play
on Daniel Jones.
So the other reason to do it is this is the Ravens' first 6 games. You get the Saints. Then they go at the Cowboys, so you have to play it through that. But then you get the Titans at home, you get Cam Ward. You get at the Falcons in week 5, and then you get at the Browns in week 6. So you do get a Browns matchup in there. You get this 4, 5, 6 stretch for the Ravens, and then also the Saints in week 2 at home. Again, I mean, getting Tyler Shuck on the road in Baltimore, home opener. You get 4 really good matchups in the first 6 weeks if you're willing to play at the Colts in week 1 and at the Cowboys in week 3.
I think that's a good one. I mean, the Colts' first game, Daniel Jones, Pierce might not even play, or if he does, he's probably limited. I think that's a like not like an amazing spot, but it's like a solid spot. And the Cowboys are similar to the Bengals, where it's like people think, oh, I don't want to ever have a defense against a really good offense, but because the Cowboys are so pass happy, if it's not just about points allowed, they're not that terrible of an offense to stream defenses against because you will get some interceptions, you will get some sacks because they're dropping back 40 times a lot of the game.
The other side of it is the Ravens have like. They may actually have a good defense, and they have a new coach, Jesse Minter, who I mean, there's people that are like, he's going to be this year's Mike McDonald. Like, there's going to be all this positive. They have Trey Hendrickson now, too. They have Kyle Hamilton they can use in these different ways. Their defense might be like the surprise. Well, not really a surprise. The Ravens have had good defenses, but like the really good defense. And then if you have a really good defense at the Colts and at the Cowboys, that's more manageable. So they're one of my favorites, too. Anyway. We've made it into a DST show.
Yeah, we got to the DST section. All right, the very last short view is we're going to talk about 2, I say this in a tongue-in-cheek manner, but 2 RB2s that are thought of very differently. So Malik Davis, shout out to you, because Malik Davis has apparently emerged from the crypt. He was listed as the RB4 on the first unofficial depth chart. For what it's worth, he actually is still listed as the RB4 on the latest unofficial depth chart, but most of the Cowboys media sources have said that he's won the RB2 job. Schottenheimer spoke of him very favorably. And so he seemingly has jumped at least Phil Maffa and potentially Jaden Blue over the course of the preseason. And then Ramondre Stevenson, Trevion Henderson. I mean, Stevenson has largely been reported as the lead back for much of the summer. Henderson, of course, has been drafted significantly earlier. Things are rapidly flipping as we get towards the season. So there's been a few reports that have been more Stevenson favorable recently. Greg Bedard recently called Stevenson the, quote, way better back at everything. Henderson also dealing with seemingly a minor injury. Anecdotally speaking, the last couple of FFPC drafts I've done, Stevenson has been the first Patriots running back drafted. I recently wrote up Henderson a little bit. You did even more extensively. So first, maybe your quick thoughts on the Cowboys, and then get into what you think of the Patriots stuff.
Well, I think I'm going to make an executive decision that we just can't talk about Trevion Henderson again on this show. We've already talked about him like a decent amount, right? Is that all right? If we just
we have. I guess maybe my one sentence question is like, has anything changed dramatically since the last we talked about him, or no? I'm fine with a yes or no to that. Okay.
No.
Cool.
I'm below market on Stevenson, and that's the thing that worries me. But there's other backs I just sort of rather take. I do buy that he's going to do stuff early in the year. Like I that's never. I thought you wrote it up really well recently too. I saw that in some of your latest writing, which is like, that's always been sort of the expectation. This situation could change throughout the season. It's clear what we're getting in August. It's clear what the first month is going to look like if you're paying attention. And I think I said to you that like people are going to be victory lapping Stevenson over Henderson by week 3. And it's like, yeah, of course they are. And so I think we talked about that plenty. The Malik Davis thing, my take on Malik Davis is if he was a sexier name, if he was a young player or anything, his cut-ups from preseason week 2 and the context of the fact that he started and was like the number 2 would have been, you would have seen him a dozen times by now. And I haven't seen him once. I have not seen Malik Davis highlights once on the timeline.
Yeah.
He was awesome. He was the best running back in preseason week 2. And I've been like maybe too high on him. I was getting nervous. I had moved him way down. I went into the game just watching the game. First snap, they have a free blitzer right up the middle, and he steps up in pass. He's kind of undersized. He steps up in pass protection and just meets the dude face up, takes a shot and stands his ground. Joe Milton has to kind of rush the throw, but you have a free blitzer. Quarterback stays clean, gets the throw out. It's an incomplete pass. Live to play another down. I thought that was incredible. I wrote it up in my Athletic article. I just saw this morning that Brian Schottenheimer actually referenced that play in the post-game press conference. I hadn't seen that. I don't know a ton about pass protection personally or anything. I thought it was a great play. The fact that the head coach also called it out validates what I felt. A couple plays later, his second carry of the game, he meets a rookie 6th-round pick linebacker in the hole and is like, it's head on in the hole. This guy is there to run fit, and he put him on his back, ran over him, and then while stepping over him, like stumbled and fell forward. Like, you know, when you literally drop somebody on their back, but then, so he got like 3 or 4 yards after the contact, he got tackled, but it was a full-on run over. Like if this was, again, any young player, that highlight would be all over the place. It was one of the more impressive physical runs. But because it was 27-year-old or 28-year-old, whatever he is now, Malik Davis, who was like undersized, no one cares. Very next play, he takes a shotgun inside give and gets up the middle for like 17 yards through the middle of the defense. Right after this big physical play, didn't come off the field. He took a carry the next play for an explosive run. And then they turn the ball over on downs, and Gardner Minshew throws a pick, and so they start the next drive really far ahead, and Malik Davis is still on the field. Before they turned it over on downs, Jaden Blue came in. Jaden Blue stumbled on both of his first 2 carries. Look, I want to be in on Jaden Blue. He's a fun player, but like this is not. He didn't have a rushing profile in college. He's an explosive guy. Couldn't win the job last year. They really wanted him to. It was all this like stuff in meeting rooms and work ethic that was getting questioned. And then this offseason, they've been talking him up. They give him and Moffa all the work. I'm not saying the way that you said this is wrong because they put Malik Davis number 4, but I guess I would push back mildly on this concept that like Davis moved ahead of them in the preseason. My read is like, yeah, they gave the young guys a chance to win the number 2 job, but they knew what they had in Davis. Davis's last game last year, week 17, he was clearly in the number 2 role late when Javonte Williams hurt his shoulder. His last game in week 17, he had a 100-yard rushing game, and then they put him on ice week 18, in part, again, because they wanted to get the young guys work, but it was almost like we can't have Malik Davis active because we'd have to use him. He just had a 100-yard game last week, so they put him on ice with Javonte Williams, and they gave week 18 to Jaden Blue and Phil Moffa. He had been playing more and more on offense, and he plays special teams too, so I think all along he was like likely to make the team and likely to be active. And it's like they wanted the young guys to get a chance and work into a role. They didn't do it. They didn't win the job. And now Malik Davis starts this second preseason game. Jaden Blue works behind him, and Moffa works as the clear 3. But the last thing after that interception, turnover on downs after Blue came in, and they get like bad rushes suddenly. So the offense stalls, and then they turn over on downs. Minshew throws the pick. They get down in the red zone. Davis is in on a pass down. He runs a little route behind the line of scrimmage. Milton scrambles. He works left with Milton, finds space. Milton throws to him. He catches and he scores a TD. That's the highlight I saw, was the receiving TD. But the fact that, 8-yard receiving TD and his ability to work on the scramble drill and work into space and get open, make himself available for a catch and run. Like Malik Davis has like 90 career touches and he's like 28 years old. He's not an exciting player. There's nothing to this profile, but the Cowboys did this with Rico Dowdle. A lot of people don't remember this, but Rico Dowdle was a special teams only and like practice squad player for 3 years before they started using him. And then eventually he worked into a role. I don't think it's out of the question for them. They see it as like the running back position as like first rule, do no harm. They're the biggest, I've said this before, the biggest first rule, do no harm team in the league in my mind. This is why I've been talking about Malik Davis since like some of the projection stuff I was doing in the offseason, is those other guys clearly are not like hitting that threshold of first rule, do no harm. They didn't as rookies, and this offseason they're talking about him in padless practices as looking great and everything, but as soon as they got into preseason and into like real training camp, they're obviously not doing enough. And if they're not doing enough that the Cowboys are not comfortable putting them on the field or they can't win this job over Malik Davis, it also probably means that if Javonte Williams goes down, Malik Davis has the potential to play a lot. I don't think he would like guaranteed keep the role forever like the Rico Dowdle stuff, but he's clearly draftable in the late rounds. I've moved him way up and I've put a target tag on him. He's free in every league. You can take him in the last round of any format you want. I'm not saying he's like the greatest thing ever. I do think people are going to pick him up after like week 1 or 2 when it becomes clear that he's the number 2 in season. Jaden Blue's not going to play much in week 1. They're going to play Lepke. And this would be my guess at this point. I think maybe they'll use a little bit of Blue, but they're going to play Lepke on some obvious long down and distance stuff. And I think they might use Malik Davis as the sort of clear RB2 in week 1. And then people are going to be like, oh, the handcuff to Javonte Williams is Malik Davis. We should add this guy. Early season. It's a great offense. I mean, you have all these like positives going for him as well. But the key thing I was going to say there was just the preseason week 2 performance between the pass protection reps, the running over dudes physically, showing a little bit of burst when the blocking was good to get like 17 yards on that one run, and then catching a touchdown out of the backfield. You give me those 4 plays in 2 drives, and one of them was after an interception. It was a short drive. He played 2 drives and then got put on ice. You give that cut up and say, oh yeah, he was the number 2 playing ahead of his backfield mates. Look at what he did in these 4 highlight plays. You make that a preseason cut up for anyone who's not Malik Davis, and you've seen it a dozen times by now. But for whatever reason, we don't care that Malik Davis is the clear number 2 and looks good doing it. Well, not for whatever reason. It's because he's Malik Davis.
Yeah. No, I mean, well put. Definitely think that he is draftable. I mean, to make a comp, right? Like Kamani Vidal has been like a guy that's been like an 18th round pick, with the assumption of, okay, he's not even like in sort of the complement role, but if Hampton went down, he'd be the 2. And like Malik Davis probably as of now is at least that, but Jaden Blue is a far inferior version of Keaton Mitchell in that scenario, to the point where Davis might be the complement and the RB2. So definitely draftable. I did think to give Blue a little bit of love. I thought he looked a lot better as the game went on. He had that fun hurdle rush, and like I think he will. I would bet they still have a package of plays for him early in the season. I think Phil Moff is just going to get cut.
The other thing I wanted to say about Malik Davis, or I don't need to, but I'm going to, is I would pull up his profile and was looking at it as you were talking, and he had the 100-yard day I mentioned. He also had the 43-yard touchdown run on Thanksgiving last year. And then he had a 20-yard run the week prior. He had, like, not that many runs last year. He had 52 carries, but he had a 20-plus yard run in 3 of these games. Like, anyway, he's not, like, super explosive. Some of the other games, his yards per carry was super low. 4.8 for the season, though. Like, he ended up being pretty efficient because he had some explosive runs last year. We'll see what happens. But I feel like, I mean, I'm not, like... As much as I'm talking about him that favorably because he looked that good, I'm not saying he's like an obvious pick that you should take in round 14. I just think, because I do think there's signal to the fact that they wanted somebody else to win the job, that he is going to be 28 in November. Right. He's been a career special teamser. They seem to like not be wanting him to be the number 2, maybe because they want to use him more on special teams, whatever. So like it's sort of similar to some of the cases I was making about Mike Washington and at the very top of the show, where it's like even if Javonte Williams goes down, does Malik Davis stay as the lead runner the whole year? Probably not. Probably they try to find some other answers in some different ways. But if there's a team that would just play Malik Davis the rest of the year, I honestly think like that's how we got Rico Dowdle. Like that's how that happened.
Yep.
So anyway,
totally. All right. That's it for everything I had on the show sheet for the short view. This is breaking news live that I'll just report. Luther Burden practiced today.
Hey, good to hear.
Yeah. All right. So shout out Luther Burden. All right. We're just under 2 hours in. It's definitely going to be a 2-part episode now because I probably have at least 4 hours worth of content just on the rest of the show sheet. But let's get into some of the ADP disagreements. I sorted this into 4 categories. We're probably not getting into all of them today. We'll pick this back up. But I have one group of guys that both of us are much higher on than ADP, a group of guys that ADP is much higher on than us, and then eventually I have guys that you're higher on than me or I'm higher on than you. So why don't I run through? Why don't we start positively? Let's talk about the guys that we're both higher on than the market.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. So we'll start off at the quarterback position. This might be more applicable to like high stakes drafts or even best ball drafts, because I think in home leagues, all of the quarterbacks tend to go very high. But both of us have Jaden Daniels as the QB3, ADP QB5. I'll turn this over to you first. Your thoughts on our shared enthusiasm for Mr. Jaden Daniels?
I think it's really straightforward. If you're going to take a quarterback high in a year where there's a ton of late round quarterback options, he has to have the elite ceiling. And this is Jaden Daniels straightforwardly has that. He showed it as a rookie. If you look at the actual, if you do the projections, and that's really helpful for quarterbacks, particularly with the rushing stuff. You get into scramble rate, you get into design run rate. That stuff for him in college was huge. Like when we talked about back in his rookie year, we talked about him in relation to Anthony Richardson a lot as a community. You and I talked about that directly actually as well. The big thing that really popped in was Pro Daniels, even though he was going later, was that in college, he scrambled a lot more than Anthony Richardson, and he had more design runs, and his overall rushing was meaningfully better, even though I think Anthony Richardson's a super good athlete, and the knock on Daniels was health, and he got hurt in year 2, and people are concerned that he's not going to run as much because he's gotten hurt at the NFL level now. The play style suggests there's going to be rushing. It's part of it. He's one of the only guys who didn't see his rush attempts per game drop fairly meaningfully last year among the elite running quarterbacks. Like Lamar Jackson, he was banged up for most of the year. His rush attempts per game were career low by a lot. Jalen Hurts' rush attempts per game came way down. Some of that's the lack of QB sneaks with the tush push and stuff. Josh Allen's rushing, I think, was solid, but as he's aged, it's been dropping a little bit over the last couple of years. He's not old or anything, but as guys get around 30, they tend to run a little bit less, but he's still going to have that play style. There's some other guys whose rushing went up, but they were mostly like Justin Herbert, and Patrick Mahomes was running more last year. They're mostly not super mobile QBs. Anyway, Jaden Daniels, rush attempts per game was 9 something and 8 something. The last couple years, a lot of these other guys were down at 6, and when I went through the projections, I wound up having him meaningfully higher in terms of rush attempts per game, which is going to factor in the scramble, right, the design run, right, all that stuff, than any other quarterback. And so you start to get into that part of it. If he runs a decent amount and then he's shown an ability to be an efficient passer, you get the real fantasy ceiling. And if you're going to take an early quarterback at QB3, or where we have him, wherever you're going to take him at QB5 is ADP, he better have the ability to finish as the QB1, and not just finish as the QB1, but separate as the QB1. So my issue with a lot of the other QBs that go high is I can't see ways they can separate as QB1 from whichever late round QB performs well. Last year, Josh Allen was the QB1, but he was about 4 points lower than Lamar Jackson the year prior as the QB1, and he was so low that both Matthew Stafford and Drake May, these late-round QBs who hit, were right there with him. Well, that just meant that, as although Josh Allen was a fine pick in his own right, the optimal thing was to have taken Stafford or May later, or you could have streamed and Brock Purdy got hurt, and a lot of people picked up Brock Purdy and rode him to fantasy championships. He was awesome down the stretch. Trevor Lawrence was another guy who struggled at times and then was awesome down the stretch. And so you can stream QBs and hit on somebody who's really good for a period. The only way that a QB is worth this ADP is if they have Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels ceilings, and Josh Allen, who can he could be better than last year. He's been better than last year before. It's fascinating. He was QB1 last year when his production was down. But yeah, that's why I have Daniels QB3. I don't think there's anyone else that goes around that range, including Drake May, whose rushing came down meaningfully in year 2, cratered. Particularly his rushing efficiency. He had a really high yards per carry in year 1. It was maybe he's a exceptional runner. Maybe he's a Josh Allen level runner. In year 2, it's he's a good scrambler, but he's mostly the strength on May is the deep passing and stuff. And anyway, I don't understand May's ADP at all, but we're not talking about May because he already was hyper efficient last year. I don't think AJ Brown can make him more efficient. He's already due for regression. He was the most efficient regular season passer in the league last year. So people are oh, look how good he was. We'll add AJ Brown. No, he was due for significant regression probably. You've added AJ Brown. Maybe that regression won't be as bad, but he can't be as good as a passer And then you're ignoring that he's not the Jaden Daniels level runner. So anyway, I'm mentioning him because he's the guy who goes QB3 in ADP. I'm ranking Jaden Daniels ahead of that because I see a clear ceiling in the early QB range, and that's what you have to have.
Yeah, I won't repeat everything that you said because I would echo a lot of it. I think on May, I totally agree. It sucks. I have him as a fade this year. I've never had him as fade in my life. He was like one of my favorite players in their draft year. It's always one of the less fun parts about being an analyst in this is there's guys that you like love in their draft year, and then you love them going into year 2, and then they succeed, and you want to bet on them forever, and then you're like, no, now their ADP is too high. I'm not going to draft this guy anymore. But Jaden Daniels, I'll phrase it slightly differently, but I think it gets to the exact same point that you mentioned, which is all of that next group, that kind of QB3 to QB8-ish range. Daniels, May, Burrow, Hurts, Caleb, Herbert, however many guys you want to go down in that list. Daniels, to me, is the only guy I think is capable of competing with a peak season from Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson to be the QB1. Like, if Josh or Lamar have a high-end season for them where they actually are able to pay off those heightened ADPs, I think Jaden Daniels can go toe-to-toe with them if he hits the top of his range of outcomes because of the combination of the rushing ability as well as the real-life passing upside that he was able to show in year 1. There's a lot of concern about the personnel in the Commanders' offense. You've said this before, and I agree that I don't think they've done a particularly good job of building a sustainable operation around him. That being said, their offensive line is rough this year without Tunsil. Their offensive line was rough 2 years ago. Their receiving weapons are old this year. They're a lot better at receiver this year with McLaurin and Diggs than they were the year that he was leading them to the NFC Championship game. Their running backs are uninspiring now. Their running backs then were Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. Jaden Daniels has done a lot with a little before. I have confidence that if he's healthy, that he is one of the better quarterbacks in the league with an extremely fantasy-friendly profile. So, if
I will say the Tunsil injury, I had him in the same tier as Jackson and Allen, and then a tier break. I moved him to the lower tier because I am. He's still QB3 for me, but I'm like, it's not like a priority. I don't want it I'm into him for sure, but there's so many good quarterbacks later.
Right. The way I phrased it at the beginning is what I would say. If you're in a home league and quarterbacks are being drafted in accordance with ADP, I'm probably not drafting Daniels because all of the early quarterbacks go higher than I would consider them to be draftable. But if your specific league economy values quarterbacks below that, or if you're in a high stakes league and Daniels will fall a lot more, he'll regularly be there in round 8, round 9. And I don't even love that, but if I was going to, if I feel confident in paying up for any of the early quarterbacks in the high stakes format, Daniels is probably the one I'm doing it for most often. And then in a best ball format, he's by an absolute mile my most drafted quarterback in Underdog this year.
Nice.
All right, let's talk Amarian Hampton. Maybe I'll lead in with this one and then throw it over to you.
Yep.
First of all, I'll just mention that the ADP that I'm citing for this, because, depending on where you draft, this ADP may or may not match what you're looking at. I pulled this from 4for4's ADP tool, and I aggregated Yahoo, ESPN, and FFPC. So a mix of home leagues and high stakes leagues together here. Marion Hampton currently going off the board in that aggregate as RB12. I have him as RB8, and as will be a theme with players that I tried to rank differently from consensus, Gretz just mogs me by coming in over the top with the RB6 ranking on a Marion Hampton. So anytime I want to try to stake out a stand on a player, you just take out an even bigger stand. But Marion Hampton, we've talked about the Chargers a lot. The running back rooms under Mike McDaniel the last 3 years have all been top 5 in backfield XFP. I will give a lot of the credit for that, of course, to Devon Achane, who I think is one of the most impressive talents and most unique players in the National Football League. I also give a ton of credit to Mike McDaniel for recognizing a player that a lot of people did not view as favorably as he did or as I did coming out of college, and coming up with really creative ways to utilize this super unique skill set in super fantasy-friendly ways, and of course ways that I think really did a lot for the Dolphins' offense. Even in San Francisco, with far inferior running back talent, he was able to find ways to utilize the specifics of a player's skill set in a way that helps the offense and helps him for fantasy. You think of like Elijah Mitchell was a guy who was a pretty imperfect prospect, but had a lot of speed. And the way that McDaniel, when he was the run game coordinator for Mitchell, was designing all these like zone toss plays to the outside and getting the chance to use his speed. He ends up having like a breakout rookie season that year. You bring that to the Chargers on a team that I think the strength of their skill player group is this running back room. I would put the Chargers as a strong favorite to be number one this year in total backfield expected fantasy points to the position. And I think that if anything, what we probably see is Hampton having a pretty massive role. And then if they want to involve Mitchell, as much as we're optimistic that they will, that maybe comes, that secondary back role comes a little bit more at the expense of the receivers and tight ends than it does necessarily at the expense of Hampton, where last year we still saw that really high backfield XFP in a backfield that was basically only Devon Achane, and how that compares to this ridiculously fantasy-friendly backfield that he was able to operate when he had two running backs he really loved in Achane and Mostert. And so I think that the Mitchell stuff comes at the expense of Hampton to some extent. I don't think it's a one-for-one. I think a lot of it is he's going to try to figure out how to orient the skill players on his team and how much of that is the total running backs versus the wide receivers and the tight ends. The fact that Oronde Gadsden doesn't seem to be a big part of their team's plans points me in the direction of he's not emphasizing a lot of ball in hand stuff from the tight end position, in part because I think he's going to emphasize a lot of that at the running back position. So Hampton, big back, super productive back in college, strong metrics, all around workhorse type profile. I think that there is probably a higher floor here than I think the market is seeing, because I expect the total pie to be so big on this offense. You've talked really glowingly about the Chargers as well, so I'll throw it back to you to add your perspective on Hampton as a clear-cut target.
I mean, these are ones we agree on, and we shouldn't waste too much time restating the same points. I think you said it really well. I love the points about the size of the overall pie. That's the way I'm looking at it. I will say on ADP, you were obviously given the caveat about you using some sort of home league ADPs and different sites where you have it aggregated at RB12. But you've pulled in FFPC's ADP for this. He is RB10 on FFPC, which is a little interesting. He's RB9 at Underdog. He's RB7 over at NFC. The other like main high stakes site. And so I would just, I mean, he's going 13.8 there. And that's in a 3 wide receiver format we were talking about a bit ago. I would just say, I think, the RB12 is a little like, you have him at RB8. You said I kind of like mocked you by going to RB6. I mean, you're behind market at NFC. Like some of these sites are like, not to say that you're like low on him, but like some of these sites are pretty aggressive on him. Part of my reality here is I'm a little bit out on James Cook. And so I'm just sort of kind of, navigating that range. I don't see the meaningful ceiling for Cook. But I agree with you on the points on Hampton about the offense as a whole. And one of the other things I was going to say to kind of wrap up a lot of what you said was a while back you tweeted about how it's harder in the market these days to bet on profiles and where we can be ahead of market and these types of things. This to me is just a clear profile bet. Everything you said, he's a first round pick, stud profile, very efficient rookie. You're playing hurt through a high ankle sprain for much of it. And now we have the offensive coordinator upgrade and the most, exciting offense. And he's the quarterback's everyone's favorite MVP candidate. And he's the lead back as a year 2 back, but you kind of have a hard time projecting the volume, which is why in some of these home league sites that are a little bit more projections focused, you wind up with a little bit of a lower ADP. Yeah. Sign me up. I'm going to be above market on that. That's the type of profile bet. You were talking about the like Tootin types and stuff that are really expensive, but this is an example of that. It's more marginal. We're ahead of ADP by a half a round or a full round or something is all, because it's in the pre-dead zone, really condensed first 2.5 rounds. All these profiles are good, but you can get a ton of Omarion Hampton if you buy into the profile as a year 2, like big picture bet and fade the projections. You can get as much Omarion Hampton as you want.
All right, I'll throw it over to you first on this next guy. It's another running back going in a very similar range. It looks like each of us have this guy ranked directly one spot ahead of Hampton. We're talking about Chase Brown. And this is one I will note. You mentioned all the different sites and sort of how I threw these things in there. Chase Brown's ADP right now is RB10 in the aggregate. That's a little bit weighed down by ESPN, where he is a bit of an outlier low target. We're probably closer to the consensus on him in other setups. But you have him up at RB5. I have him at RB7 right now. And the ADP, like I said, in the aggregate, RB10. Why don't you lead us off here on Chase Brown, who you have ranked pretty aggressively up at RB5?
I had Hampton ahead of him for a long time. I moved Hampton down when Hampton was,
and I swapped them.
Yeah, when Hampton was getting a little bit cheaper for a moment there, and people were getting pretty excited and bullish about Brown. And I've seen Brown go higher and higher in the first round. I have the high stakes ADP in front of me, so I will note that you're right. On both FFPC and NFFC, he is the RB6. He is, on both high stakes formats, the guy right behind James Cook, who is the only one that is keeping me from being right at market on Chase Brown, because I have Cook down at RB7. I am 2 spots down from his RB5. I'm not like way out on Cook or anything, but you're not going to get him there, and I don't think he's I mean, the reality in these ranges is it is sort of like take your guy, right? And so I had Jeanty higher.
Who are you willing to draft, and who's not a part of your plans this year? And so I have James Cook ahead of Chase Brown. It's pretty immaterial because I have James Cook behind like a group of wide receivers that he goes ahead of, and like I saw him. I mean, I was just in a main where he went like 6th overall ahead of Jonathan Taylor. I'm never doing that. So like Cook's not going to be on many of my teams this year unless I'm
the only reason
outlier situation.
The only reason I shuffled this tier to move Jeanty out, I kept Cook behind because I thought about moving Cook back up for the same reason, because it's sort of immaterial. It's like whether you're actually going to take him or not. Is that I did get in a spot where Cook fell, and I had this question, and I wanted to take both Brown and Hampton over Cook. So I was like, all right, if that's where I'm at, then I'm just going to rank it that way. But I would say that I basically view Brown and Hampton as like the same value. I have a really hard time differentiating. So I would ask people not to read too much into the difference. The main difference I have on them in ADP is at a site like FFPC, there's Brown at RB6 and Hampton at RB10. There's a 4-spot gap. On NFFC, they're back-to-back RB6, 7. On Underdog, they're back-to-back 8, 9, like you have it, where Cook's 5, Barkley's 6. Barkley's 9 at both of the high-stakes sites. And then Kenneth Walker is 7 on Underdog and FFPC, but 10 on NFFC. He's the one that's offsetting the Hampton change. So Walker's 7 on FFPC and Hampton's 10, and then it's 7-10 the other way on NFFC. Anyway, Chase Brown as a player is, I mean, I think it's straightforward. He is what he was last year. He's the 3-down player, the lead back. Samaje Perine looks like the number 2. One of the other things I wrote about in my preseason stealing signals piece, and in my second piece over at The Athletic, was about some of the stuff I saw in preseason week 2 was they played Taj Brooks, and I saw some people talking about that as, like, I used the awesome Dwayne McFarland's preseason notes for to help with my preseason stealing signal stuff, and I saw like his write-up was favorable about Perine for him sitting with the starters and Taj Brooks playing. I would see it slightly differently, which is that I think it's very clear that Samaje Perine was going to sit. Well, I think Samaje Perine is the early season number 2, I should say. So I don't think I'm like disagreeing with the main point that Dwayne was making. But Samaje Perine is a 30-something-year-old. Like those guys don't like. He's 31 September 16th. He'll turn 31 right around like week 2 probably. He's 30 and change right now. I like him playing a bunch in the preseason doesn't make any sense, whether he's the clear number 2 or not. Taj Brooks is a guy who didn't really play all of last year, and makes a lot of sense that they would want to get some reps, and they played him for a whole half, but they mixed in other guys. They didn't play him a massive amount. I would say that Taj Brooks looked good. He didn't look amazing, but they played him in every situation. They played him in pass downs. He had a nice catch and run in the 2-minute drill at the end of half, and then they gave him a shotgun draw right after that, and he had like a pretty big, his longest run of the day right after that in the 2-minute drill. So he was in there doing some of the long down and distance, whatever 2-minute drill stuff. And then prior to that, he was playing on early downs and running and doing all of those things. which I'm turning this Chase Brown conversation into a Taj Brooks conversation, but I think Taj Brooks is actually pretty interesting late is another one because he's basically only competing with Samaje Perine if something were to happen to Chase Brown. But it gets back about Chase Brown. It gets back to the fact that there's not a lot of competition behind him. Perine will probably play some on pass downs, which can be a little bit negative. But Chase Brown is going to play on, all the early downs. He's going to catch enough passes on early downs. They've talked about moving around the formation, wanting to feature him as like the main other guy. This offense basically only is Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Chase Brown. I mean, they basically have like 3 dudes. It's going to be pretty concentrated. He's going to have a good chance to score a lot of touchdowns. I have a hard time with having him ranked this high because, I was always talking about the profile being way better than people talked about it after the rookie year because people were saying he's a day 3 back and he barely played as a rookie. This gets back to the Taj Brooks point, by the way. Chase Brown did the same thing. They barely played him as a rookie. Year 2, they made him the feature guy over Zach Moss. But people were like, he's not going to play, barely played it as a rookie. And the only reason people like him is because he had one timed top speed. He had the fastest ball carrier speed that year because he got loose on one like dump off pass. That wasn't the only thing. He was a workhorse in college at Illinois. And so I used to defend the profile a lot. But the reality with Chase Brown is he's an outlier. It's a little bit like that Dragon meme where there's the goofy one at the end. If you look at all of these college profiles of all of the guys that are going around the 1-2 turn and going in the first 2 rounds of running backs, it's a whole bunch of dragons, and then Chase Brown's undoubtedly the goofy profile. He's good. He's better than people give him credit for. He was a little bit more of a workhorse. He did have a little bit more intrigue to that collegiate profile than people give him credit for or gave him credit for early on. But there's a reason he was a day 3 pick. He's the only one with draft capital that late that's going this high in fantasy drafts. So there's a little bit of a long view conversation about whether or not you really want to be betting on him in a really heavy way. But the Bengals are betting on him in a really heavy way. There's no competition. There's a lot of work there for him. It's a really good offense. I think he's a good player. Like, I'm not doing the same with Javonte Williams, where just because he's in a really good offense with the Cowboys and there's no competition, I'm taking a bunch of him. I'm really not, because I'm not as confident that he's a good player. I think Chase Brown's good. So anyway, I'm in on him. I want exposure to him. I don't want to be overexposed. The long view stuff does meaningfully matter to me.
Yeah, the big difference between him and Javonte Williams is Javonte Williams had a .44 yards per route run last year. He was basically unplayable as a pass catcher. Or sorry, that's the wrong way of putting it. He was contributing effectively nothing in fantasy or real life as a pass catcher outside of a small stretch of games when CeeDee Lamb was hurt and they were kind of dumping off to him as a check down option. Brown has really excelled in a pass catching role. They've talked about only wanting to up his pass game involvement. And so I agree with your overall take that, like, is Chase Brown an elite running back? Probably not. Is he very functional in the ways that Cincinnati wants to use a running back as like a pass first offense that scores a ton of points? And does he do everything they need from him? He does. And that's really fantasy friendly. I'll maybe call a slight audible. So, I had him as a guy we're both ahead of consensus on, and in the aggregate ADP, that is true. In large part, that's because in a lot of the home league stuff, especially on ESPN, Jeanty, Achane, Barkley go ahead of him. Both of us have him ranked pretty easily ahead of Barkley and ahead of Achane. The one guy that goes, behind him in some spots, but ahead of him in the aggregate rankings is Ken Walker, who I have ahead of Brown. You have Brown ahead of Walker. So maybe I'll call a slight audible here instead of being purely Brown favorable. That's the spot where I am breaking the tie towards who I think is the better pure talent, the better efficiency bet. I think there's, certainly an argument for Brown there, but I'm looking at Walker. I'm saying, okay, this is also a guy I think is the pretty clear-cut workhorse in an offense I have less confidence in, but more confidence in than an average NFL offense. But I also think the Bengals offense I expect to be built primarily around Jamar Chase and Higgins, and Brown gets a lot of favorable opportunities working off of that. I think the Chiefs offense is going to be built around Kenneth Walker as the centerpiece of the offense. And I do think he's one of the most talented running backs in the league. I prefer him if I'm in a situation where I have to choose Walker versus Brown. I probably go Walker. I probably go Walker every time. I'm curious where you landed between those two, because I know you also feel pretty favorably about Walker.
Yeah, I had Walker as the RB6 in the Brown spot until this morning. When I did that rankings update, I moved him to the bottom of the tier 100% entirely because I heard a foot issue, and he's had a foot issue, and it's lingered over multiple years now, and I'm scared by that, and I'm also scared by that.
Even though they say he's fine, you're still scared.
Yeah. Well, so the second part of it is Emmett Johnson looked incredible in the preseason. Watched all of him in the preseason.
Agree.
I think Demercado's usage in the second preseason game was interesting. They were actually playing him in single back and giving him handoffs, which one of my points about him was last year he mostly only played on pass downs, and he had a really high rate of runs out of shotgun and against light boxes. They started playing him in the second preseason game as he was the lead back. Like Walker played a couple snaps, and then Demercado came in. He was the lead for the number 2 role, I should say. He was ahead of Emmett Johnson and Rachaad Smith, and they were giving him they gave him a 1st and 10 carry on the third drive of that game in single back, and a little bit while later they did as well. And he ran well. He looked good. It's like, okay, well now if they're envisioning Emery Demercado, one of my takes on Walker was he's going to get all this work because Demercado's like a pass downs only back, or that's the way he's been used in the past with Arizona. And then Rachaad Smith is like a total Jerick McKinnon as well. And I had Emmett Johnson as like the clear number 2 for early down stuff or like any kind of goal line work. Walker's been tough in the success rate sense. He's a big play guy, but I thought he would definitely get goal line work because who else are they going to give it to? A rookie or some guys that don't run under center? Now that Walker's got a foot thing, even though they're saying he's fine, I'm like, I actually think the Chiefs running back room, which was terrible last year, is deep. Because I still think Rachaad Smith's a really good player. I think he's probably going to make the team as a kick returner. And he looked explosive to me in the first preseason game when they had him starting with the first team. I think they have 3 other running backs because I thought they should have used Smith more last year. I was looking at some writing I had at the end of last year, and I had that take in Stealing Signals toward the end of the year that like the fact that they didn't do more with him, it gets back to that idea of like teams not trusting rookies right away. The Chiefs have been that way for a long time. It wouldn't surprise me if they get a little more for Rachaad Smith in like a Jerick McKinnon specific role this year. I've thought all along they would use Walker a ton. The foot thing to me was, oh crap, he might only play 60% of the snaps because they just want to keep him healthy. I don't know that that's for sure going to happen, but I love all these guys in this tier. And so I dropped down Walker a little bit as it related to sort of the workload stuff. I don't know that I even like stand on that very firm. I kept the target tag on Walker, even though I'm now behind ADP on 2 of the 3 sites. I'm ahead of ADP on NFFC. And the other 2 sites have him at RB7. NFFC has him RB10. I now have him at RB8. So like I'm not far behind ADP or anything. I think he's very draftable at that 1-2 turn. I like taking him there. I would encourage people to consider taking him there. I think that's an interesting tier that I've been trying to get right all year. As far as it relates, but anyway, it's totally the foot injury. As far as it relates to Omarion and Chase Brown, who we talked about both being ahead of ADP on, I would emphasize the reason I say that they're almost valued the same, and I've had a hard time figuring out how to rank them, is I think it gets down to like the type of drafter you are. If you're the type of drafter that says, I don't want to lose my draft in the first round. You can win. You can't win your fantasy league in the first round, but you can lose it. I hear that all the time. I don't agree with that, but some people believe that firmly. I would suggest Chase Brown to you. I don't think Omarion Hampton's going to lose the draft for you, but that's what I think the Chase Brown play is like you're going to get a good 3-down running back and a good offense.
I agree. He's the safest. He's the safest out of all these guys.
If you're going to, if your suggestion is, I want the guy who's going to go 101 next year when I'm picking at the back of the first, because I want to figure out how I can gain points against like Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson and those guys, I would suggest that Omarion Hampton is that pick, that it's a year 2 player that is a superstar that could have the really high rate of big plays and explosive offense and score 15 touchdowns and do all these insane things. And that's the point of the Hampton pick, is you're like, this guy could just be really efficient on yardage, really efficient on touchdowns, and just the exciting play of the year that we're all just like, why weren't we more on Omarion Hampton? He's a first-round pick going into year 2. He had a great rookie year. He's scoring 3 touchdowns every week. Chargers offense looks amazing. We all said this. We all said this about Mike McDaniel. And next year he's a top 5 pick. Maybe he's not the 101, but he's a top 5 pick because he's like a star. Then I would suggest you should take Omarion Hampton. Like that would be how I would delineate those two. To me, I agree with you. Walker is more in the Hampton boat, and it's why in that tier the only 2 guys I have as targets are Hampton and Walker. I moved Walker down slightly because of the foot thing. And
I
how
think Walker,
good the other
I think
backs
Walker's
have
a
looked.
combination of the two, which is why he's the one I'm the highest on. I get the foot fear. I mean, if this lingers and he's like missing practice for a week, I'll come to your position. I guess like my take would be like if a guy.
Well, he's already had it linger in past seasons and limited snaps.
Sure, but like if a guy misses 1 day of practice with a foot, the team says he's fine.
I don't want. It's like the Tank Dell thing. I don't want your foot hurting the next year. It's been a year. It's limited in past seasons.
I mean,
is this a chronic issue?
He might have a blister on his toe.
Well, he might, but he's had foot issues before. If it wasn't a player who had a foot injury and then it was a foot thing, then maybe I would be more interested in the fact that it was, it could be a blister.
That's fair enough. I mean, I guess my point is like if 1 day of practice missed and the team immediately saying he's fine, it's nothing to worry about, is enough to get him moved down, then I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like I guess he should have been further down in the first place. Like if we're that much more concerned about relatively minor injury news for this guy than we would for other guys, then
it's not relatively minor. That could be your opinion that I should have been lower on him. I think it's a major deal that Kenneth Walker's volume limiting injury in the past is a foot injury. He's a running back, and we heard foot. If you told me it was a different foot, which I'm not even sure which foot it was,
I have no idea.
So I should probably figure that out. I don't think it's been reported.
No, they haven't said which foot, and I don't know which foot his previous one was on. But
I assume it was the same foot, but I could be wrong on that. And if it wasn't the same foot, then I would agree.
Last year, he was limited.
But it was
in preseason.
It was volume limiting, and he's a running back, and it's a lower body. Any lower body injury for a running back makes it tough for him to be an 80% snap share guy, especially if you have talented backups. This is a team that likes to rotate, and their backups have looked good, man.
Do they like to rotate? They rotated because they've had dog shit running backs for 7 years. I mean, to me, it's like, okay, so I'm also not 100% sure the degree to which the injury was the reason they limited his volume last year. Like, I think it was a part of it, but I think that the team also had issues with some of the success rate stuff, and that's why they used Charbonnet a lot, and that's why they let him walk in the offseason. And then, like, I can understand why Ken Walker is a guy who people have various different opinions on. Like, you talked about the Cowboys being a do no harm doctrine, like for their running back room. I can see why a team like the Cowboys probably not big Ken Walker fans in their room. To me, the signal is the Chiefs went out and paid him this contract. They want to be in the Ken Walker business. They appreciate the good that he has to offer. They're probably not as concerned about the bad. All of the summer reports on him that I've read have not been, we view him as a weapon or we view him as an explosion. It's been, we want to use this guy all the time. We want to use this guy in the pass game all the time. It's all Ken Walker all the time. Like that, to me, I read this as they're willing to take the good with the bad. They're more enticed by all of the explosiveness and what he was able to do in the playoffs, and they're not as concerned about some of the success rate stuff. If the injury thing is a big issue, sure. I personally am not there with you on the level of concern. I get he had the foot stuff that was bothering him in the offseason last year. They managed him through that in the offseason. He didn't miss any games for it. I don't even know if it's the same foot. He might practice today or tomorrow, whenever they next practice. I don't know. I'll totally move him down if this is like still bothering him. He's not practicing a week from now. I also will grant that, maybe if you're drafting tonight, then it's too late. If you drafted off that assumption, but right now I'm still holding firm on Walker as a major target.
The way that you said that was if I moved him down based on that news, then I like basically wasn't that high on him in the first place, or like where I had him ranked, I didn't have conviction, and essentially was sort of the implication. I'm not saying that was like a mean thing or something. It makes sense, but I would argue the framing could be flipped to the other players in this tier, which is maybe you're not as high on Chase Brown and Hampton as I am, because like I had them all very, very close. So this wasn't a big move down for me with Walker. It was a micro move down. That's fair. I was trying to break ties, and I still have Walker as a target, as I noted, at RB8, but I've been trying to break ties in this range. I've been reading it the same way as you. But the one note I want to say about the Chiefs is to the point about them being really, really heavy on him. I've been looking at it like the Kareem Hunt rookie year. Go back to like Andy Reid with Brian Westbrook. When I talk to people about like Andy Reid doing that stuff, I got to go back a little bit, because for Mahomes' whole career, they've had a pass down back that was not just like long down and distance that they threw to on early downs sometimes that did rotate in. It was a lot of Jerick McKinnon. It was Darrell Williams for a while, some of those guys. Now you can say, and rightfully say, that their lead back during that time, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Isaiah Pacheco, whoever, was nothing like Ken Walker. And the closest we have to that is going back to Kareem Hunt's rookie year. And that's why I've made that argument with Ken Walker as well. But the fact that Brashard Smith had a 30+% targets per route run last year. He only ran like 100 routes, but they put him in there and threw to him with intent, and he was explosive. He's a 4.3 guy. I was really into him last year. If he's going to be on the roster, the fact that they brought in Emery Demercado, I'm not really that worried about Demercado, actually. The main ones are Brashard Smith potentially catching like 30 balls again, which he did last year, even though he like barely played. He only ran 100 routes. He got, or maybe it was 30 targets. I'm going to pull that up in a sec. And then the fact that Emmett Johnson is a really intriguing running back prospect. Yeah, Brashard Smith had 35 targets, 25 catches last year, and barely played. But they use him with intent when they put him in. My hope for Walker was like, he'll get to be used with intent on those plays too. But now I'm like, if they want to limit his foot stuff a little bit, like they can use Brashard Smith similarly to how last year they used him. But the other one is Emmett Johnson, who looked awesome in the preseason. And it's just like, hey, if you have a rookie that you really like and he's looking great and Ken Walker's foot's an issue, I mean, it's even just as simple as stuff like when you start blowing teams out and you're in the third quarter, do you put an Emmett Johnson for a series instead of sending Ken Walker out there or a couple series and then, a lot more work in the fourth quarter because you want to see more Emmett Johnson and you're up by, not necessarily even blowing someone out, but you're up by 14 or whatever. And you're like, all right, well, let's move off Walker. Let's give him a little bit of a breather. That's not good for fantasy. It's not good for your late first round pick. You want a guy like Chase Brown who's going to be on the field no matter what. That dude's staying on the field up 14 in the third quarter. He's basically playing as much as he can handle until he needs some oxygen. I'm not like the deal with Ken Walker is that you might be right that that's not why Seattle did it, but that's the concern because that's the way it's been with him. Now that he's with the Chiefs, I thought that was not going to be a concern. They're going to play him a ton. I've been telling everyone, people who are hearing the way that we are delineating this would probably be like, well, Ben's been telling me the same stuff Jacob's saying. Like, why does he sound like he's not into Walker playing every down? That's what I've been saying to everybody. Like, that's what I've been telling people, the same stuff you've been saying. The foot thing was more of a tie break. And then how well the backups have been playing in preseason, as I keep saying. But it's more risk in the range of probabilities that he's not an 80% snap share, or 75 or 70% snap share guy, and we get some 60% games, which I'm hoping we're not getting that,
Yeah, I think that's all fair. I love Emmett Johnson. Not like counting all my contests, he's literally my most drafted running back in best ball right now. I'm a huge fan of him. I'm a huge fan of his contingent value. I'm not expecting him to have a meaningful base role. But Ken Walker does get injured a lot. And so, if that happens, I think Emmett Johnson could potentially be like one of the most valuable running back handcuffs. I mean, I get why you can't draft him like where Tank Bigsby goes especially in best ball, because maybe it's less clean for is he just the RB2, but the upside perspective on him is massive. I have no Brashard Smith based concerns personally. I get some of the appeal there. To me, it's like, yeah, they have always had this running back that they throw to with intent on early downs. They had it with McKinnon, they had it with Smith. My read is they got sick and tired of having to use a deeply flawed running back as a bit piece to do that with, alongside a bunch of other guys who run in sludge. And now they got a feature back who can do everything and is really excellent at doing the Jerick McKinnon, Brashard Smith stuff. And I think that they're really excited to do all of the stuff they were doing with Brashard Smith last year with Kenneth Walker, in addition to giving him a bunch of carries on top. That's my read for that stuff. I think Johnson might play like a little, and I think he has the potential to be an absolute home run if Walker were to get hurt for a sustained period of time. But I'm pretty optimistic on the touch count for Walker. I also view the pass rate stuff so differently than you, because we've argued about that before. So I'm expecting way more rush volume than you are for the Chiefs.
I don't think you're expecting way more. Every time you talked about it, you've said like they're going to still be plus PROE and be like 8th in the league. And every time I've talked about it is they're probably not going to be first or second, but because that's where their baseline
I think I'm
is.
Maybe squishing together how much Pat and I disagree with how much you and I disagree, and maybe you're somewhere in the middle. That's possible.
Yeah, my take on the pass rate all along has been they've been first or second in pass rate over expected every year of Patrick Mahomes' career. It's going to come down probably, but there's a lot of room from there and even league average. They're likely to be above league average. And then when I talked to you about that, you specifically were like, I think they're going to be like between 0 and +1.
0 and 1. But yeah,
only 8 teams are above above 0 last year. So that you're thinking about them as like 75th percentile. 8 teams is a quarter of the league. You're thinking about, and that's basically how I've described it. I mean, maybe I think there's a little more room above that. Sweet. But the point you made about the Brashard Smith thing, like I wouldn't disagree with. You were like, I have no concern about Brashard Smith, all these things. Like that's, yeah, I mean, he's Brashard Smith. Like I'm not saying that Ken Walker's not going to play because of Brashard Smith. I was saying there's a slight change in the probabilistic range. But anyway, like I agree with you that in the like vast majority of scenarios, Brashard Smith's not going to mean anything to Ken Walker, who signed this big contract. I just think it's notable that there is a guy there who's their fourth running back that played some snaps last year and got a really high rate of targets per route when he was out there. And like, it's like, this could become a small issue for his target ceiling, you know, like, but in isolated outcomes within a range of outcomes. Anyway, it's not something I'm harping on. Anyway, let's move on from this tier. It's a really interesting tier of running backs. I'm glad we had a long discussion about that personally.
Yeah, I am too. So that's it for the running backs that we are meaningfully ahead, both of us at least, on the market. We're gonna get to a receiver, and I'll certainly pitch this one to you first because he's really been your guy over the course of this offseason. And Javonte Williams. Jameson Williams. I apologize.
He's been your guy. I thought you were doing that intentionally. I thought you did that intentionally. Oh my God.
No, I just looked at the J.A. Williams and my brain just short-circuited. All right, Jameson Williams.
Good bit. Good unintentional bit. I loved it. Good
unintentional bit, hey? Yeah. We will get to Javonte Williams. I don't know if we'll get to him on this show or the next show, but at some point in this exercise, he won't be appearing on the both higher than the market side of the show sheet, though. Jameson Williams, ADP right now, wide receiver 27. This is a guy, you've mentioned a lot about the different platforms. Like, I'm mildly ahead of the market on him in Underdog, and so I don't think I even realized how much higher. I didn't realize that he was going to be a guy that I was going to be overexposed to until I started doing FFPC drafts and started looking at Home League ADP, because his ADP is a lot lower on those non-best ball sites, and then all of a sudden I went, wow, I'm a lot higher on this guy. You're way higher than me. You're up at wide receiver 18. I have wide receiver 23. He's still been a guy I've been getting very consistently in my managed format drafts. So we've talked about him a little bit on the show before. If people didn't listen to that, or you have any new angles and stuff, why is JMO one of your big flag plants this year?
Well, I mean, I don't think I'm going to do the whole take again because I've done it, and we've talked about him extensively. I just basically think his first 4 years have been rocky and progressed upward, and I understand why people don't think there's a year 5 breakout or they're not as common. I think this is one of those scenarios where a year 5 breakout could happen. Last year's the first year he really ran big route volume, but he did. He's 5th in the NFL in routes. They're going to be concentrated this year. And, you know, people – I saw our buddy Sam Sherman, like, compare him to Alec Pierce and make this joke about how good they are yards per target and all these things. And the other big thing about Jameson Williams, I would just reinforce that I thought, you know, that comparison missed was that Alec Pierce has the really high ADOT, and we talked about this. Like, it's hard for him to be really productive without adding more volume at lower ranges. You can't be hyper target heavy with just deep balls. Jameson Williams' ADOT the last 2 years, when he's been more of a high route rate guy, has been a lot lower, a lot closer to league average. They give him the ball horizontally. His ball in hand way better than Pierce and even like Christian Watson and some of those other deep threats. Watson in the preseason game was interesting to me because he actually ran some of the routes in the shallower area that, you know, he hasn't gotten a ton of, and he gets some of them, but are vacated by Romeo Doubs and some of that. So maybe he has a little more room to do that. I don't think Pierce is going to do that. I think Williams already has all of that. He's 2 years of data of that, where he can earn volume at different depths. That can lead to more volume overall, plus the efficiency. Maybe the efficiency regresses, but I'm less concerned about the efficiency regressing when he's efficient playing the ball in the air deep, and he's also efficient with the ball in his hand when he catches short, because he's getting all this yak. It's not just relying on, hey, I can win contested catches at a really unsustainable rate. He's doing a lot of different things before and after the catch point. So There's a lot of stuff with Jameson Williams I think is very favorable. The thing that I would mention about having him at wide receiver 18, in my rankings, I try to be pretty market dependent. A point maybe or like not dependent, but market, somewhat like market influence, somewhat like I've said this before. I would like to just rank all the players agnostic of market. And then whenever I start talking about stuff like this, people are like, well, just do 2 different ranking systems. And it's like, no, the reason I do one ranking system is I like to make changes basically daily, and I don't want to have to change every single different scoring format and every single different thing. So I ask my subscribers to understand how to take my pretty basic format dependent rankings and apply it to their format. I've written about a million times about how to do that and which classes of players and things you should be looking at to do that. But the idea behind it for me is I can then have the most fresh and up-to-date rankings and be making micro changes every day and not have to worry about changing tons of different rankings. So anyway, the way that I do it is that way. It's also understanding that when you have one ranking sheet, people are going to draft directly off it. Like there are people that play in home leagues that don't know a lot, that don't read a ton of the stuff, that don't listen to the pods. I don't mean to say they don't know a lot, but like they don't have the time for the amount of content consumption that would be required to understand all the nuance. They're going to get the rankings. They don't care enough about the ADP stuff, and they just click the buttons off the rankings. There are few guys that I rank meaningfully ahead of ADP in this way because I think they just belong there to such a degree that I'm comfortable if somebody were to play it that way and click that button, then I'd be okay with it. I'd be like, you gave up a lot of value, but I don't think you're going to be in a bad spot, like in bad shape in your draft for it. When I put together my initial rankings, I have him near the top of this tier that includes a lot of guys that go ahead of him. I don't always draft him ahead of them. There's nuance to that. When you're in like high stakes formats and stuff, you want to take lower ranked guys. I have Terry McLaurin several spots lower. I talked about how me and Sean took Terry McLaurin and tried to get Jameson Williams to come back to us in one draft. Jameson Williams went 1 pick ahead of us. And I wasn't like, oh no, I got sniped. It was like, look, I have to have some humility as well. These are my takes, but I can be wrong. I have to play the market. I have to try to, if I drafted Jameson Williams where I have him ranked in every main event, I'd have him in every single draft. And I don't want to do that either. So, and I'm not trying to get every subscriber to draft him is sort of the point of the philosophy, but there are a few guys like him, like a Keaton Mitchell, like a Juwan Johnson, you and I both agreed on the last show, and we're going to talk about in a minute that we think is very misvalued, that I have ranked meaningfully higher, like a Makai Lemon we said we're going to talk about, meaningfully higher than where you can get them, because I just think they have to be ranked that high. Like Makai Lemon, I was telling you, and we're going to talk about him in a sec. I just think he's such an incredible prospect. I understand that there's concerns about the offense, concerns about the hamstring, etc., but I want him ranked aggressively from the perspective that I just think he's so mispriced as a round 1 rookie. Like we were talking about KC Concepcion could be this year's Garrett Wilson or whatever. Like Makai Lemon is going so late now for what his prospect is. He's a better tier of player than Concepcion in a better offense, even if you have issues about the Eagles. Anyway, I'm getting off target. This is just sort of a rankings thing where I think these are if you want to say flag plant plays, the biggest misses by the market for me are these ones that I'm way off ADP on. And it just gets back to this point that I do think the market is missing by enough that I'm willing to sort of emphasize that with my ranking in a way that even if somebody were drafting directly off this rankings, I don't think they would be wrong to take Jameson Williams where I have him ranked. I don't think it would be that big of a problem for their build to take him a full round or round and a half higher than they would need to. It's not like I'm ranking him top 10, and I don't think he's going to be top 10. But I have no issue defending having him 18 from a pure accuracy standpoint. It's just the sort of usability of the ranking that I'm discussing. And anyway, I don't understand his ADP at all. It makes very, very little sense to me. But it's one that you can wait on for sure. You can take the guys behind him if you're not as sold as I am. I would suggest that when people ask me who your favorite plays of the year or this or that or whatever, this is one. This is a big one. This Lions offense is going to be concentrated. You want pieces of it. The idea that Sam LaPorta being active and the splits last year with LaPorta is going to make it so Jameson Williams can't have a ceiling, I think is like the maybe 15th or 20th percentile outcome for Jameson Williams. I think it's a floor outcome for him, and it misunderstands that this offense is going to get even more concentrated than last year, that things are going to get You know, let me rephrase that. Just that this is going to be an offense that scores a lot of fantasy points. They're in a dome. Their defense is pretty good. This is a team that likes to get in shootouts. They're going to get in shootouts. All the Jared Goff stuff is always favorable, which is that like he's a drop back passer, doesn't scramble. So you get a lot of pass attempts. You get that really high drop back conversion rate. They're going to throw plenty. They don't have David Montgomery to take away a bunch of play volume. Like there's so many elements here that I feel like the market is just completely whiffing on with Jameson Williams. But is what it is. I have him ranked very aggressively. Yes.
I also won't like go all the way into the micro stuff because you touched on some of it. We've talked about it on previous episodes. But I will touch on like some of the format stuff. So I'd mentioned earlier that I didn't realize how high I was on him until I started shifting my scope more from best ball into the managed format where he goes a lot lower. FFPC especially, I'm kind of locked into the FFPC mindset right now because I'm in the middle of like 4 consecutive main event drafts. He goes like I have him up in the tier with a different group of wide receiver that kind of goes intermingled with that group of young running backs. Like, if you want like a Burden, you want McLaurin, like any of those guys, you kind of have to take them ahead of or instead of some of like the Swift, Tootin, Bucky Irving, like that tier. You can pretty reliably get JMO when most of those running backs are already gone. He's a really attractive piece there. And we took him recently on one of the main events that I was streaming. I can't even remember which one. But there was a lot of comments like, I don't like JMO in managed. You never know when to start him. All of that kind of stuff that you get. My pushback to that would be, like, I can understand why his scoring distribution probably a little bit more favorable in best ball. I think that the you don't know when to start him thing is really wrong in managed. Yeah, compared to most other guys that score similarly to him, probably will have a wider band in terms of his weekly distribution of points. Like you'll probably have more low scores, you'll probably have more exceptionally high scores. The answer to you don't know when to start him is you start him every single week.
Every single week. It's not a hard problem. You just accept the floor.
You start him every single week, and you just have to accept that like sometimes you're going to get 4 or whatever. I mean, maybe not. Maybe his role really changes. But if your view is this is going to be a wide band player week to week, you just start him every single week. Because this is a guy where if you look at what he did last year, especially what he did over the latter portion of the year, you either buy that he broke out or you don't. And if you don't, then the answer to when do you start him is you don't take him, right? Like if you think that he is going to be a guy that is like highly questionable to make your lineup, then he's not a target for you. If you buy that he's broken out to the degree that his overall season performance is worthy of being a clear starter, you simply start him every single week and you accept that there's going to be some level of ups and downs, and that's fine. I don't think that that's a problem at all. Consistency is really overrated in fantasy football. This is not a guy like RJ Harvey is a guy where I'm more sensitive to this argument because he is probably a marginal player in your lineup who you might be not starting every week. You might be like, I have a bad bye week situation. This week he goes in the lineup. I really hope it's the week where he catches a 25-yard wheel route touchdown and not the week that he doesn't and scores 4 points. Jameson Williams, you're starting every single week anyways, unless you have an absolute super team, which is a good problem to have. And then you're just dealing with it. So I don't think that he is a meaningfully worse pick in redraft. I think he's a massive value in redraft, especially in the FFPC format where ideally you're making the sprint and you're going to want a guy who has the upside of getting you 35 or 40 and you carry it forward for the entirety of the sprint regardless of what week that happens in. So I think he's a clear-cut target. I have him ranked a little bit behind you, but I think he's definitely a guy that you want to be planning your drafts around having a pretty high exposure to.
I was talking about not understanding the ADP, and you're probably right that it's this concern about consistency, and I guess I probably am just sort of realizing it as you're talking through that, because I maybe haven't given that enough consideration as a counterpoint and not discussed that enough. I think you made incredible points, but yeah, it's a fundamental misunderstanding. Excuse me. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how to play fantasy football, how to win at fantasy football, and where fantasy football is going in 2026. We are going to have more floor games across the landscape. We have offenses that are doing less. Generally, we had fewer we had more floor games last year. Yardage went down. There was several of these games where like we didn't even get like a second half. Like teams are packing it in a little bit. Like the way that the NFL works now, there are some games that are just like not as much of a like we have to garbage time is so important and we have to die for any given Sunday and all that stuff. It's just not that mentality anymore. So the idea about Jameson Williams having this floor, I would just emphasize that can happen to anyone. It's going to happen to guys that you think are more consistent. And to your point, like consistency is overrated. What's way like, and yeah, he's going to have some zeros probably in the second half of the year. Given the stat, after LaPorta was out for 10 games, he averaged a 1,400-yard pace, and he did that with one of the 10 games, 10% of the sample being a goose egg. He had a 3-target, 0-catch game. Still averaged 1,400 yards in the other 9 games on a 10-game pace. Like you're getting enough production to offset that. And when it comes to weekly and seasonal stuff and you don't know when to start him, again, you start him every week. You accept that some weeks there's going to be a bad score. You shake your head at it on Sunday night and you go, man, I lost this game by a few points and Jameson didn't really do anything. That's tough. Most fantasy matchups are not decided by a few points. And a big part of that is because they're mostly decided by who has more ceiling. The weeks when Jameson Williams hits, he's going to hit in a way that will give you an 80% chance to win. I mean, not 80%, but it will fundamentally improve your odds up to win by one player hitting a ceiling. And the whole idea of how to play fantasy football is understanding weekly ceiling wins weeks and seasonal ceiling league winners win leagues and not being so worried about floor. And if you build a roster that has enough of this, when you have the downsides with the Jameson Williams, you hit the ceilings in other places, and the accumulation of this type of build actually gives you floor. This is what you learn over the years. You might have some weeks where you hit all of, like a parlay of all of them hit a floor, kind of sucks. But I build teams like this all the time. I do it every year. And what you find out is like 2 or 3 guys hit a ceiling. The other guys have their floor weeks and you still score enough points. I actually actively swerve into these kinds of guys because I have a full team where I decide whether I have enough floor or ceiling. And the way that like variance in these things work is you try to get pieces of enough good offenses in those things that they're not all going to. And the idea with a guy like Jameson is he's in a good enough offense. He's not going to have too many floor games. That's my argument. He's going to have well over 1,000 yards. He's going to have enough production overall to offset the floor games. It's not great if the guy has a ton of floor. Like I had Xavier Worthy as a meaningful part of this strategy last year, and Xavier Worthy had a bunch of bad games. It wasn't great. That's not the idea. You're not trying to have just all floor games. You need the ceiling to offset it. But if you have the right pieces in a lineup, you're not going to have a floor in your lineup. And you're just parsing who cost you the win too much is my argument.
Yeah, and to add just one little extra note on that, I think there's a meaningful difference between JMO, and you brought up the Worthy example, and like maybe Burden is someone that I would throw into that category this year, where Worthy, yeah, like if he hit, he probably also had the same JMO thing where it's wide band week to week. But like Worthy going into last year, I would also say was a wide band player from a wide band player, period. Like this is like a high ceiling guy. We also have a lot of uncertainty. Maybe he's not as good as his price is. Like he had, I think, ranges of outcomes where you're starting him every week or you're starting him never, because we're missing on the season long like profile. Like Burden is a guy I would put in that category this year. He's also a target for me, but he's a guy where I would consider him wide band from a seasonal perspective. I think his ceiling is really, really high. I would concede he probably has more uncertainty, a little bit of a lower floor than other guys I have ranked right next to him in my overall rankings. I think JMO is a wide band player week to week. I don't think he's that wide band of a player season long. I think we do have a pretty good idea of what he is. There's obviously a degree of question to like how much higher can the ceiling get. I think he has already secured a floor from a seasonal perspective of like, this is what we're getting from this guy over the course of a season. Whether that can go higher, we'll see. But I think it's really a week to week question, which to me makes him like, it's not even a concern to me.
Great point. Last year, he was very productive, had a 16.1% targets per route run with the extra routes. And sometimes when you add the extra routes, there are more empty routes. He was at 17.4% back in his second year when he first ran some route volume, 18.4% in the third year. So 16.1% lower than that. I don't know that he can go much lower in this concentrated of an offense. So like to that point about his floor, it's like we're already seeing him be pretty productive on a pretty low target rate. The case I've made is if he runs 600 routes again, you better be damn sure he's going to stay at that 16% targets per route and not even just get back to 17.5 or 18.5 like he was at 2 years prior. Because if he adds that kind of just, 1.5 to 2.5 percentage points of targets per route at his efficiency levels, which they can come down from where they are and still be good. I've argued I trust them to be pretty strong. He's going to be very productive. And I regress his efficiency way down in my projections. But because I think this is going to be a pretty concentrated offense and volume, that I could get to him and still have him as a remarkably I made up a word. I think I said markably. It was a combination of markedly and remarkably. But anyway, I have him as an efficient player, and I had enough targets for him. He still came out in my projections like well above ADP and all that stuff, while regressing below 10. I don't go over 10 for yards per target, but like this is the player I would go over 10. I think I have him at 9.9. This is a player I would go over 10 for in a base projection. He's been over 11 the last 2 years. And again, at lower ADOTs because of the ways he does a lot of different things. And the offense is so similar and all these things. But regardless, I think you made great points there. I just wanted to, Anyway, we're going over 3 hours. We're going over 3 hours.
All right. This one I think we can do pretty fast. The next one is Josh Downs. You have him wide receiver 32. I have him wide receiver 35. His ADP is wide receiver 40. We've talked about him a ton. So definitely felt like he was worthy of including here as like a very clear long view brand play. Do you have anything to say about Josh Downs we've not already said? I think I've said it all, personally.
Yeah, we've said it all. Let's move on. I mean, I'm not worried about Keenan Allen. We've talked about that
last week.
Yeah,
I like Josh Downs. I'm not worried about Keenan. I'm not worried about Pierce coming back. To me, all of that was priced in. If they didn't sign Keenan Allen, if Pierce was not healthy, like should be going like for round 3 or something. We love Josh Downs. Matthew Golden, another guy we've talked about, but I don't think in quite as much detail. I have him wide receiver 37. You have him wide receiver 38. His ADP is wide receiver 42. That's meaningful. I'll also note that wide receiver 42, it's the opposite of what I mentioned with Hampton and Chase Brown. ESPN is multiple rounds higher on him than any other site. So basically what I'm saying is at our rankings, we would be willing to still have him as a reasonable target on the one outlier platform that has him way higher than everywhere else. And on any other platform, we are way higher than the market on Matthew Golden. So if you're looking at like Underdog, if you're looking at FFPC, if you're looking at Yahoo, wherever you draft, the disparity in our ranks is even higher than what I just read out.
Underdog, FFPC, wide receiver 46, NFFC, wide receiver 47. So all in that range. We have him both in the back of the 30s. This is another one where it's in that tier of like the Jameson Williams thing where I've just been way ahead of market by a lot, but I've been moving him up and I'm still way ahead of market. So like my rank in my little tool shows that I'm 8 or 9 spots ahead of positional ADP at the 3 sources that I have. That's, comfortably ahead of ADP. People using my ranks are going to get exposure to him. The next guy we're going to talk about is Makai Lemon. I still have Lemon ahead of Golden at this point, and Lemon, I guess, is going behind him in a couple of these sites. He's going higher on Underdog, meaningfully higher, but he's actually going a couple wide receiver slots behind Golden on the high stakes circuit. And so maybe that's
an anchoring thing. And it may be a fair anchoring thing. We talk about the anchoring. The anchoring isn't always bad. It doesn't always mean the Underdog's prices are worse, but like he was a 6-7 turn guy on Underdog for a long, long time. And so even as he moves down, this is a guy who used to get drafted, like 3 rounds higher than Golden. So an Underdog moves slower. Whereas on the high stakes stuff, ADP shifts a lot more because we haven't been drafting there in as much of a high volume for months and months.
But I am going to move Golden ahead of him, I think, as I see this, just to talk through my process, not to... It moves him up 2 spots and gets me to wide receiver 36, and you have him wide receiver 37. So that's the main reason I'm doing it.
Oh I'm just God. Kidding. You couldn't let me have one.
I'm kidding.
Anyway, who can I move him ahead of? Let's take a look here.
No, it was genuinely that I didn't realize that Golden is going ahead of Lemon by a couple spots on those high stakes spots. We're going to talk about Lemon too, and I already kind of mentioned it. I think Lemon is pretty mispriced based on what the profile actually is on those high stakes sites. You can get a really nice deal on him. And it's great. And then to know what you said, that on ESPN, Golden is going so high. That's a major site for a lot of people. So I want to make sure Golden's in a place where to get him. As far as Golden's concerned, as far as my take on Golden is concerned, wrote about him favorably in field tippers in March. Relative to the market was way out on him. I said, if you had the right expectations of his rookie year and look at some of the positives, look at the playoff game, look at the efficiency, like yards per target, even though he didn't earn a ton of volume and he lost routes. He ran one of the big, negatives. He ran very few routes for a first round receiver, but if you had the right expectations for the guy coming in, I think, it was hard to be like massively disappointed. I said it wasn't a disqualifying rookie year. A lot of people really out on what he didn't do as a rookie. Then they got rid of Dobbs. Then they got rid of Wicks. They cleared the decks for him. They've talked about him positively all offseason. They've talked about him playing in 2 wide receiver sets. We've found out that he's playing in 2 wide receiver sets in preseason. He's looked good in the second preseason game. His one official target was a 4th down play that was not a very good throw, down and behind him, and he went down and got it and still added some yak, got a 19-yard gain on it. And then right after that, they only played 1 drive, the first team, but Watson got multiple targets, and Reed was out and Kraft was out. So, I mean, it's nice that we saw some for Golden. We needed to see something. He had that catch. Right after that, he ran an inside slant, I think out of the slot, if I'm remembering the play right, and got grabbed and held as he was making the slant break. It was a very clear hold. They also called pass interference. It was on a 1st and 20. He still beat the hold and caught the slant like while being held. But it was only like a 6-yard gain or something, and it was a 1st and 20, so they would have been at like 2nd and 14, and they got an automatic first down off the penalty, so they accepted the penalty. So he only had 1 catch on the drive. He actually got targeted twice, drew a penalty, caught a pass through the penalty. His best game last year, I mentioned, was in the postseason, was in that playoff game. LaFleur talked about it earlier in the offseason and said that was great that we saw that best game out of him. There was a Coach Speak Index quote, and it referenced that it wasn't just the production, but it was being in the right spots and the run blocking and doing everything. It was the most well-rounded game they saw from him all year. And then when the offseason, they were like, we're ready for this. This is something the Packers have done in the past. Like Devontae Adams had kind of tough first couple years, took a little time, then became what he was. Jordan Nelson. And they've had a draft and develop organizational philosophy for years. They don't really go out and get like huge free agents a ton. They like, and so this idea of like a guy not producing as a rookie being dead, there's a lot of like league-wide trends that show that if a guy's a first-round pick and doesn't produce as a rookie, that's really bad because that's the team that took him in the first round and they're going to use him. And if they don't use him, that's not good. The Packers are one of the teams that I would say like don't over-apply the aggregate to the specific, kind of to slightly modify that term that I like to use. I don't think it's necessarily misapplying the aggregate to the specific, but don't over-apply it. I think we do want to apply it. We do want to be aware that Matthew Golden didn't play a lot as a first-round rookie, but we also have to be aware that in the context of the Packers organization, this isn't irregular. It wasn't irregular for Dobbs to need a little bit of time, and he was better after his second, third season. He played a decent amount as a rookie, but basically every receiver that's been good for the Packers in a lot of years has been guys that worked into a little bit more of a role. Jaden Reed was one that a little bit more productive right away that was kind of interesting, but didn't play a massive amount necessarily. Anyway, the Golden thing is, yeah, you're making a little bit of a leap of faith on the profile not being incredible, but the 2 wide receiver sets and all that stuff, and the lack of receiver depth this year, he's gonna play. He's gonna run enough routes. So the concern is like he didn't play enough as a rookie. He's gonna play, man. So now it's like you're just saying that he's bad because he didn't play last year, even though it's very clear he's gonna play this year, and maybe he will be bad. But you're getting a really cheap bet in an efficient passing game. And like Christian Watson is not a high volume number one, typically speaking, right? He's a guy who's been, I think his career high is like 100 targets. Like he's a guy who's been hurt a lot, but mostly a deeper threat,
I'd be shocked if he got anywhere close to that. I don't think he's ever run 300 routes.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't even, maybe he hasn't.
I think his career high in targets is like 70.
Yeah, 66. You're right. I don't know who I was thinking of. I was thinking of somebody similar whose career high. Maybe it's Alec Pierce, who's gotten like close to, I think 100 targets is his career high, and people think he.
Yeah, Watson, like despite a very like up and down career with injuries and stuff, his actual seasonal totals are like bizarrely consistent in terms of, I think he's run like between 250 and 300 routes like every year, and then he's earned between like 50 and 70 targets every year. It's like, it's weird how consistent it is for a player that you think of as being wildly inconsistent and having these like huge jumps in perception, but maybe the end results actually wind up pretty similar.
And they're not that great, but like maybe this will be the breakout year for him. But there's a lot of opportunity, and Jaden Reed's still there and all that stuff. But there's a lot, like Tucker Kraft said in a quote the other day, and nobody seems to care. Like by midseason, they're going to turn me loose. Like he basically was telling you he's not going to play full snaps for the first half of the year, but nobody cares. He already needed to add targets. He was already too dependent on efficiency. Anyway, we're not going to go there. The Matthew Golden thing to me is that Dobbs, because of the way their passing game is fit, Dobbs in the X role has gotten more work and more routes and more production over the last few years than you would really think that he sort of earned or should have been getting. And it looks like Golden is very clearly taking that spot and working alongside Tucker Kraft, who's mostly been a catch and run tight end, and Christian Watson, who's mostly a vertical receiver, and Jaden Reed, who's more of a move guy that does stuff short and deep. This intermediate range is like, who's going to solve that problem? That was the big case that I gave in June when I wrote up the Packers I did my projections, and then I wrote up the Packers for offseason stealing signals, and then I did the ETE pod and was high on Golden on that pod. Was that, look, this intermediate range that Dobbs vacated, like, it looks like it's got to be Golden. And I'm not even like that in on the talent, but I think people are really head in there sanding this guy. It does seem like he's rising a little, but I was just talking to you about it pre-show. It's like people have been pounding the drum for him. You've been pounding the drum for him too. You mentioned Hayden Winks has been pounding the drum for him to me, but like his ADP is not actually moving. So he's a great value. I mean, it's moved some. I remember early on when I was talking about the Xavier Worthy, Ricky Pearsall group.
Like, not a lot.
Yeah, every time I was talking about like there's a lot of value late. Xavier Worthy, Ricky Pearsall, these guys, I'd always be like, and you could throw Matthew Golden in that, and he's going like a round later. And everyone's like, ooh, Matthew Golden, ugh, gross. I'm like, dude, I don't think he's great, but you guys are crazy. And now he's going ahead of those guys. Like he's moved up a couple of rounds since like the offseason, but I mean, God, he is still a discount.
I want to start my Golden blurb by citing negative things I wrote about him as a prospect, because I think it helps register like how stubborn and frankly like wrong I think the market is being by like establishing that this is not a guy that I ever would envision myself as typically being in on. So I copied this into my write-up on the Packers. This is from prior to when he was drafted. I wrote, there's a possible outcome where Golden becomes an efficient secondary receiver in the NFL who stretches defenses vertically and provides value to an NFL team. If that occurs, it's possible the NFL is right to value him highly, while fantasy managers are correct to be skeptical for the purpose of their objectives. Most of the players Golden compares to statistically, though, were not just fantasy busts, but busts in the NFL. I'm sympathetic to the capacity of the fantasy community to annoy NFL draft Twitter, but fantasy folks typically win this specific debate more often than not by fading overdrafted, unproductive, fast wide receivers. In any case, despite whatever off-ball value Golden has, he's never been a volume-earning option, had 13.9% uncontested targets per route run, which ranked 226th of 262 receivers with at least 50 targets nationwide in 2024. That's like my baseline on Golden. I hated this guy as a prospect. I was very loudly out on this guy as a prospect. He had a rookie year that, was not like inspiring. It didn't make me think of him worse as a prospect. I guess it makes me think of him like a little bit worse because my expectations were low and he didn't change them. But it certainly, I don't think was like the word you used was perfect. You said it wasn't a disqualifying rookie season. I think that's the most succinct way of putting it. I don't think it should change our outlook that different than whatever we had on him as a prospect profile. So against this backdrop, guy that I did not like, did not believe in, I'm just legitimately stunned by how immobile the market has been with respect to his ADP. I think I brought this up on this show or at least other shows, but like Ricky Pearsall was another round one pick with a super spotty analytical profile who had a very Rorschach-testy year one that was super incomplete and had injury issues. And then the 49ers cleared the decks for him. They talked him up all preseason. He got a ton of positive hype in camp, and fantasy managers shot him all the way up to like round 5 at this time last year. People were drafting Ricky Pearsall in as a year 2 wide receiver with, I think, a pretty like similar kind of issues, even as an older player. DeJon Stribling this year, I mean, we've talked about him before, and I've castribulated to a large extent from where I was early on. But like, Jesus. This is yeah, you like that one?
No.
No. Wow. But like, you know, another guy who like weak analytical profile, or at least weaker. I know you and Sean have brought up some positive notes, so I don't want to make that sound overly universal in terms of some of the weak notes, but I think objectively you would say like not like the strongest analytical profile in the world, but has shown out over camp, got a lot of opportunities, had some fortunate injuries around him, steaming all the way up boards. I'm seeing him even go in like the 7th and 8th and some of the high stakes stuff. Sometimes, like in each of those two cases, I think the market has gotten a little bit carried away, but I totally understand the excitement of a market to say, hey, like, I'm skeptical of this guy, but he's got a ton of opportunity. He's got a ton of team investment. He's really young, so we don't know what the ceiling is on this player, and I'm willing to take the bet on the opportunity and the investment. And I guess that just applies to everyone but Matthew Golden, because if you look at what happened this offseason, you mentioned how much they cleared the decks for him. They got rid of Dobbs, who has the most overlapping role with him in the offense. They got rid of Wicks for no reason. Like, Dobbs went and got paid by New England. I understand why Green Bay wouldn't match that offer. They got rid of Wicks for basically nothing when they had him on a rookie contract this year. They could easily have Dontavian Wicks on this roster if they wanted to. They didn't want to explicitly because they said they were tired of rotating their wide receivers all the time, and they wanted to centralize those things on these 3 starters. One of the big ones being Matthew Golden. And then all of the like preseason training camp stuff, if you follow the Packers beat writers, like every time that there's like a standouts of camp list or a best players of camp list, like Golden's on it every single time. He's running all of the routes. I guess in terms of where people don't get to the level of excitement, it's a mix of the prospect profile stuff. In my opinion, I share all of those concerns. I usually care about those concerns a lot. I'm still able to get excited, so I think that's a bit of stubbornness. And then in terms of the other arguments I hear is people saying, oh, well, he could be the number 4. It's like, I just don't really care about the hierarchy of things that much. Like, I think the way you should try to look at this is from a projection standpoint, like, what is his actual target share going to be and how big is the pie? And like, I don't actually care that much about whether his 19% target share ranks 1st or 4th. Like, that is irrelevant. You don't get fantasy points for being in the order of targets. The people around him are all talented, but they're all limited. Watson, you mentioned, has the depth issues. He's also never sustained it over a full season. Reed, I think, probably could be an all-around target earner, but they've only ever played him in 11 personnel. That's a signal that they've given that they're going to continue. And Kraft is a super low area guy. So if there's anyone to me that has the opportunity or the best opportunity to consolidate a high volume role, I think it's Golden, and I think the base case is that their target shares are all kind of the same, and how you want to order them 1 through 4 is not that relevant, except for the fact that one of them is really cheap and is going to run all the routes, and you get to bet on him with Matthew Golden. So I think he's a massive priority play. I think his floor is actually pretty high. I think you're getting a ton of ceiling for free, and I just don't understand what I view as inconsistency in how the market approaches this player versus tons of other players that are young and have spotty profiles and have a ton of excitement that usually I'm the one being the negative Nelly about. And it's kind of fun to get to be on the like hope and optimism side for a change.
Yeah. And I do think it's going to change more as we go, because I think people are figuring it out a little bit. But I think like you putting it that way really resonates. I think it's a really good point about how high Stribling's gotten and stuff. Like I kind of worry that like Golden's going to be shooting up now finally, but it has taken forever, and it's kind of surprising it's taken forever. The one thing I was going to say is you were talking about some of the concerns in the profile about basically stuff like he was a deep threat, and like you were talking about the uncontested catch target rate and the ability to like some of that stuff. People could worry that doesn't translate to the intermediate routes and all that. So a couple notes I would give. One, the Packers emphasized a ton last year. They had a bunch of drops problems in 2024 that they liked Golden because he has big hands and he had really good catch rate in college. And they talked about that this offseason a little bit as well. One of the things they like about him in the intermediate range is he brings balls in. And that's what we saw in that second preseason game. I mentioned the throw was low and behind him on a 4th down. He went back and got it. Some guys don't make that play. He reliably caught that ball. He also reliably caught a ball while being penalized by being tackled, basically. That's something that's going to earn him more work. Again, Romeo Doubs was not like a special player. He was that guy for them, that he was consistent enough with the hands and some of that stuff. That's what they like about Golden. The second thing I would mention, when we were talking about the rookie season that I didn't mention already, that's like about it not being disqualified, He had 3 deep shots that could have been long touchdowns early last year that Jordan Love missed him on. And Jordan Love's a good deep thrower. That's actually one of he's a very efficient deep thrower. It's sort of an anomaly, but there was 2 in the Washington game in week 2, I think it was. He had about a 50-yard throw where Golden was 2 steps behind the defender and he underthrew it. The defender came back and dove and tipped it away. And then later, it would have been like a 90-yard TD. Golden only had like a step on the defender and Love overthrew it. It would have been a really nice throw to hit him in stride and not slow him down enough to get tackled. But if he hit him in stride, Golden could have ran for the whole thing. And then the third one was in Cleveland. Cleveland was a very windy game. The Packers ended up losing that one. But it was another one that could have been like an 80-yard TD. Golden got loose, and Love's throw ended up fading over Golden's outside shoulder. Golden caught it, but it led him out of bounds with like no defender in front of him. And he wasn't even like running up the sideline. He was running like up the numbers almost, but it led him like 8 yards to the right, like pretty meaningfully toward the sideline. So he catches it over the shoulder, but couldn't stop his momentum from going out of bounds. If that throw just stays in bounds more, in Cleveland, he would have had a long touchdown. I say all of that because in small samples for young players, we often see those types of explosive plays drive after the catch efficiency or after the target efficiency. Like early career Van Jefferson had 3 catches of 65 plus yards in one season. And I remember emphasizing like that was his whole profile. There's nothing else here. Like only 5 guys in the entire league did it that year. And Jamar Chase and Deebo Samuel were 2 of them was like superstars. And then it was like Deontay Hardy and like, yeah, I mean, all I think about is how to, bash Van Jefferson, so I still remember this stat perfectly. But anyway, going back to the Golden point, Golden's yards per target and like after the target efficiency was good despite being open and doing his job and generating explosive plays that Love missed him on, where he should have had a lot more yards driving that number up. They weren't in there. He did enough with the other stuff as a rookie. It's part of why I was like pretty optimistic when I saw that his yards per target was still good, because I was writing about in season, he was open on some of the. I watch all the games. I write stealing signals. I was out on Golden as a prospect like you were. I was out on him. I didn't have him on any teams last year. Actually, I take that back. I had him on the ship chasing team with Pat and Pete. I wasn't in love with taking him. We got a really good price, and I think Pat was more in on him or something. But we ended up grabbing him. I had him on one main event. But anyway, I was personally not a Golden guy in a major way last year. And I was watching the early season stuff and writing about it as noise that he hadn't been getting more production because he was actually doing his part and getting open. And so this idea that I'm talking about the intermediate stuff with Dobbs, it's that, but it's also he's going to run. He's still, what you're talking about the deep threat stuff. He still has that, and he's still going to run some vertical routes, and he's probably going to get open on a couple, and maybe Love hits him on a couple. We always talk about the real receiver ceilings needing targets at all depths. That's one of the things I really love about this Golden profile. If it hits, is I think he's going to get enough volume in the intermediate range, and then also probably has the potential for splash plays. That's a 1,200-yard receiver, man. Like that's a good season. Like that's there. It's totally there.
Totally. I mean, it's massively there. It's if you listen to Packers media, if you talk to like Packers fans, I mean, the way that they talk about this guy is that they think he's going to be the wide receiver 1. And then like, I mean, I'm not trying to like talk bad on anybody else, but like I was just doing a main event draft where like it was getting streamed by 2 different groups. And one group got Christian Watson in the 6th, which is really nice value. And they were like fist pumping and they were like, I can't believe this guy fell here. We took Golden in the 9th and like people were like laughing at us. It's like, oh, like a bunch of slappies, like taking Matthew Golden. I think Matthew Golden's going to outscore Christian Watson this year. I
think
really
he might
do.
too. That's the biggest reason I'm out on Watson.
If they had the same ADP, I would take Matthew Golden first. And these guys are thought of in completely different stratospheres. I think it is it's a fascinating spot. So anyways, that's our Golden stuff. We have a couple names left to get through that we're higher on than the market. We're at 3 hours, 17 minutes. Maybe we'll save all the other categories for part 2.
I got 20 more minutes until I have the next thing on my schedule. So we aren't going to be able to do too much more.
Rapid fire. We're going to finish this category. Makai Lemon. I don't think this requires too much explanation for me. So you're at wide receiver 36 on him. I guess you just moved him down ahead behind Golden a second ago. So maybe now you're at wide receiver 37.
That's right. That is right.
I have him at 40. His ADP is 50. I mean, from my perspective, this is just like a classic case of, okay, the situation's bad. Okay, he's had some injuries. there's a degree to which you can punish a player for that's reasonable, and then there's a degree to which you just take the name of this podcast, the long view profile, and you go, this is one of the best wide receiver prospects in the class. In your opinion, I think you had him as the best pre-draft. I had him the second best pre-draft. Even if you bake in all of the negative externalities, what is the lowest price that is reasonable to pay for this player? Wide receiver 50 to me is completely unreasonable. I'll pitch it over to you for any additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't do like pre-draft rankings for Dynasty or anything. I get really deep into the rookies when I start doing my projections in May and into June and July, and take me forever. And as I work through it, I think Lemon has clearly the best profile, so I would have had him ranked first if I was doing all that. I think it's interesting that the Eagles traded up for him, and the Eagles are a very good talent identification organization. When he slid to 20, and people are like, well, he only went 20, and Tyson and Tate went the top 10. Like, arguably that was for the wrong reasons. People were mad about some of the off-field stuff. His profile is incredible. I don't want to go too much in the profile stuff, but I mean, the reasons that I like it so much is 3-year early declare. It's 10 plus yards per target every year. It's a ballooning targets per out run every year. He's earning volume. He's efficient on that volume. It's efficiency, both pre-catch point and the ball in hand efficiency is really good, which both Tyson and Tite had some ball in hand concerns. There's other positives. I mean, there's so many positives with the profile. I think he's a really good bet to be effective as an NFL player, because guys that are that effective, it's like the Harold Fannin thing from last year. You're that productive in college, you tend to be good at football. And there are the profiles that were like, yeah, this is an interesting profile and we're in on him, but we're not sure, and then it doesn't pan out. The ones that are just like, everything's better every year in college, and they're 3-year early declares, and they're just constantly producing on like a per route basis and whatever else, per team attempt basis, everything. Like, those guys tend to be good at football, man. Like, they tend to just be good at the game. Like, they're able to, and so like, he didn't test particularly well and all that stuff, but I loved watching him because the ball in hand, he did some returning for him too, which is usually good evidence of ball in hand ability. The team that's seeing him in practice thinks they need to get the ball in his hand and on special teams. When he has the ball in his hand in space on receptions, he gets downhill like a runner, like a running back. Like, he runs forward. And I don't know. I loved watching his yak stuff. He doesn't dance, and he gets yards, man. And he like takes away angles, even though he's like, I was actually watching him, and then I like went back to his testing, and I was shocked at how bad he tested, because when you watch him, you're like, he's like a guy that looks faster than his opponents. He's taking away angles and stuff. But I just think there's a certain like knack for picking up additional yards. Anyway, all that's just to say that like, I can't. First round capital, team traded up for him. They have a clear need at wide receiver 2. I understand Dontavian Wicks is having a good camp. This is the Olabisi Johnson, Justin Jefferson thing all over again. Like, Dontavian Wicks is Olabisi Johnson. The Packers didn't want him. Dontavian Wicks can run routes and earn volume. He had good targets per route, but his yards per target have never been good. He's not an efficient player. Doesn't catch a lot of balls, etc. Great. He's having a good camp. He's getting open. He's creating separation. He's like Adonai Mitchell. Like, these guys, they're gonna run target rates, but they're not going to be good enough.
Crazy how similar the Jets and the Eagles situations are, hey, where they have like a Wicks and a Mitchell on the outside. They have the rookie who's getting he won't play in 2 wide receiver sets. They have, I think Lemon's a lot better than Cooper, but they have a tight end who's had a slow camp, who's also a rookie. Like, it's like Spider-Man meme. They both wear green.
It kind of is. No, that's a good point. But the whole situation is very open for Makai Lemon, I think. Devonta Smith, everyone's picking to take a huge step forward. When I wrote Field Tippers in March, before I understood their whole offseason, I was saying that you should expect that as a base rate, that he has a career high in targets per out. He's always been not like an elite number 1 in that stat, but like that, he's been in the 21% range. We'll see him jump to 25% this year. But it is relevant that he's never been above like 21% in targets per out run. He's not like a meaningful target earner so far at the NFL level. I do think he's going to have a career high this year. But that's part of the reason I'm out on him, is they drafted a really good rookie. As the season goes along, I expect Makai Lemon to be a meaningful part of this passing game. And I don't think people are giving that enough credit. This whole thing about like the hamstring and some of the things you're talking about that is like some of the FUD. It's like, this is another one. Like, I already compared him to Justin Jefferson. Now I'm going to compare him to Jamar Chase. It's absurd. Like, he's not that good. He's a different profile than those guys. But it's very similar to me to the Jamar Chase drops thing in camp, where it's like, people want to react to every rookie the same. Like, you know about how excited people are getting about Stribling, and they've kind of lost the plot. Like, I was in on Stribling in Dynasty season. I made you draft him with me on that one team. Although you wanted Raritan, who's also had a great camp. Either of our picks would have been fine. We ended up taking Stribling. But like, people are just like shooting him way up boards because it's like, oh, rookie uncertainty. And like, again, this long view thing of like, analyze the profile. Lemon's one where they're like, oh, hamstring, got to move him way down. This, that, the other thing. Now, I did move Tyson way down, but the Tyson one was immediately months.
Tyson's missing half the season. Lemon's practicing today.
Lemon's already practicing. The report was he's right back with the ones. We're not like even making him work up to anything.
I just watched him catch a touchdown in practice 2 seconds ago on my timeline.
Yeah, he's a stud, and they're going to use him. They understand what they have in this player. They're going to use him, and people are pushing him down with with a general rookie bias, with a misunderstanding that this is a profile that can produce in so many ways. Ball in hand, before and after the target, earn volume, be efficient on that volume, like per target. His yards per out run was phenomenal. Like, I have him ranked as low as I can rank him. I can't rank him any lower. It's absurd how low he's ranked. I don't think you can. I think you can make the case that like Carnell Tate can go lower. I think you can make the case, especially with Tyson's injury.
He's a better prospect than Carnell Tate, and he plays in a functional offense.
You can make the case that you're out on these guys enough to keep pushing them down. Makai Lemon, he's too good of a talent to rank him any lower than I have him ranked. I'm sorry.
Definitely with you on Makai Lemon. I'll hit on briefly our next guy. We have 2 tight ends left. We're done with receivers. Juwan Johnson is the first one. I could honestly rank him even higher than this. It's not necessary to do so, but we each have him as the tight end 12. He's going off as the tight end 16. Both of us were already thought he was a value before the Jordan Tyson stuff. Now that's only been exacerbated. To the degree I had any concerns about Juwan Johnson this year, it would have been the guy who was a rotational tight end earlier in his career. He finally became a full-time guy last year, not like a traditional Y blocker type. They add Delp, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe if Tyson's a stud, Olave obviously is a stud, maybe they de-emphasize the bit of the receiving at tight end. And that was the only reason I wasn't expecting him to come in and repeat a lot of the route stuff that he did last year. I'm completely out of concerns on that front. I mean, they lose Jordan Tyson for half the season. Who knows what we're going to get out of Jordan Tyson this year? I hope a lot at the end of the season. One, Juwan Johnson just moved up, from the 3rd to the 2nd in the target order. And also, I think now they have to view what they prioritize at tight end a little bit differently. You need more receiving out of the tight end position now, vis-a-vis blocking, if your wide receiver 2 is Devon Vele. And so I think Juwan Johnson, at the very least, for the first half of the season, is probably just going to run back what he did in the second half of last season after they traded Rachaad Shaheed, which is to be an every week tight end 1 who runs 80% of the routes and gets a lot of targets in the intermediate and deeper ADOT compared to other tight ends, and is going to be a massive hit at his cost in every single format.
Yeah, we talked about him recently, and we were talking about where to put him, and I think listeners definitely know we're in on him. The last one, another tight end, I think we talked about too, but everyone's in on. But what do you got? Getting
increasingly in on. Well, just T-Ferg is everybody's caught up by now, but maybe not in your like home leagues. If you're drafting on FFPC, I think unfortunately it's over on the T-Ferg stuff. He's gone in round 9, my last 3 main events. But if you're drafting on Yahoo, ESPN, CBS, etc., I don't know if the home leaguers are quite as woke to Terrance Ferguson. I do think he is the highest upside swing, the highest chance of it's week 1, and oh my God, he ran 75% of the routes, and he's just going to be a monster this year. So still into T-Ferg.
Yeah, that's the thing. I just told someone this last night. If you don't get one of the elite tight ends in your home league because you're kind of trying to prioritize other things early, or even if you do, when we talked about this recently, Jacob, you were like, take him in the last round of all your home league drafts. And I was like,
exactly.
That's a great call. Well, now he may go higher than that, but at the time it was a great call. But I was telling, like, I mean, my strategy is, includes getting some early tight ends, but or an early tight end. But if you don't accomplish that, you take Terrance Ferguson. You can take him with Juwan Johnson or something. Take him with somebody who's a little bit more stable so you feel a little better. Hunter Henry, Chico Conquo, Dalton Schultz, whoever. Make sure you take Ferguson. Ferguson is the upside play that, like you said, Jacob, in week 1 we could find out is like tight end 6 the rest of the way. And that gets back to the Davante Adams stuff. The team did, like, people are super in on Adams, but Davante Adams, I think he's going to score touchdowns, but he got a ton of air yards last year and was not good at that. And early in the offseason, they wanted to get rid of Adams. They told Adams' agent presumably told everyone else. Everyone knew that they had been gone out of and then they asked, the Les Need or McVay or whoever, they asked him about it and they confirmed it. And it was like, yeah, I mean, we had the respect for Davante Adams. We told him we want to trade him. We're trying to trade him. We're exploring a trade, whatever. And the main thing was it was a big contract as well, but they didn't feel like they got what they needed out of him. The thing that they tried to get out of him, other than just goal line targets, was a vertical role. They tried to actually use him as a bit of a deep threat and do a lot downfield, and he used to be pretty good at that stuff, and he was bad. His efficiency was really bad last year, and I don't think people are understanding that Davante Adams 2025 was meaningfully different. It was the like age cliff season for him. From that respect, maybe he'll have it back this year. I don't know, but it typically doesn't come back for guys once they go over that age cliff. And you're just betting into the 14 TDs with him. The reason that's relevant to Terrance Ferguson, he had an 18 plus ADOT as a rookie. And they talked early in the offseason, he can play all the tight end roles and the wide receiver roles. They think of him as this weapon. We've had theoretical players like this before. People who love to like point out hype guys don't always hit would be like, how hilarious it is that I'm talking about a tight end with an 18 ADOT and he can play wide receiver and all these things. Like, yeah, many times we've talked about this stuff. It has not worked. But with the Rams, they've done this before. It's similar to the Packer point. They've done this before where a guy hit from kind of nowhere. Puka was the deal. Kyron was the deal. And you heard a steady drumbeat out of the organization like we are from Ferguson both those years. Ferguson was a second round. Blake Corum did nothing as a rookie. And then in year 2, we started hearing the drumbeat and he played a big role in year 2. Ferguson was a second round pick, did very little as a rookie, and from the beginning of the offseason, they were telling you they love Terrance Ferguson. They've been telling you the entire offseason, and they've been saying he can play all the positions, he can do all the stuff. It probably won't be an 18 ADOT, but the fact that he's potentially a vertical air yards weapon in addition to whatever else they have planned for him is very bullish in conjunction with this idea that Davante Adams is a guy they have already told you they don't think can do the vertical air yard stuff anymore. And they don't have a lot of weapons in this pass game. I don't think people realize like Tutu Atwell's gone. Like that was a rotational deep threat. Like they're right down to Jordan Whittington and like Kanata Mumfield and those dudes. It's not like when you go through the projections process for a team that has such a high expectation. If I've written that if Puka goes down, they're screwed. It's part of why I think Puka could be the wide receiver 1 this year pretty comfortably. And I was ranking him that way until like suspensions became a conversation and all that stuff. But there's not a lot of depth in the passing game right now. And if you have any concern about Davante Adams, Puka's going to get work. But the fact that they're just talking to you so much about Terrance Ferguson, you got to listen to. You just got to listen to.
Totally agree. And I mean, I guess the whole point of this episode is a lot of guys where we totally agree because it's guys that we were higher on than the market. That was 3.5 hours. We got through one of the 4 sections on the show sheet. So good work by us.
Hell yeah.
At some point, we'll get together to finish this out, and we'll get to the guys that were lower on.
So
we'll get to the guys that were different from each other on.
We talked about doing it as maybe a part 2 this week. We're hoping to try to fit it in this week. If we do that, we really will have a short view because there won't have been...
We'll have no short view.
We'll have basically no
right
short
back
view.
In. Yeah, unless something crazy happens between now and when we're back on the mic.
There might be a couple news notes that are worth mentioning, but we're not going to have a week's worth of stuff. We won't be able to find anything to make the short view long, and we'll hit on the rest of the stuff. Hopefully we can get that to you guys. We're recording this Wednesday. Hopefully we can find time Thursday or Friday, get it to you before the weekend, and make this a 2-parter.
All right. Thanks a ton.
Subscribe on Patreon. If you love this content, you want to support us. One of the things about the Patreon we maybe haven't said a ton of is we made it available so people could help support us. We're not taking ad money. That's not to say that we're never going to take ad money, but currently we didn't want to have like a deal with some podcast distributor and then they would put ads on our pods and we just had to like figure out that whole thing. in part because I've gotten complaints about what types of ads are on my pods in the past, and in part because I don't think it's as fun of a listener experience, we've talked about these things. So we decided to let you guys support us directly. We've had a lot of people sign up. We really appreciate that. People often talk about the content that we're doing. We have or are going to do behind the paywall. We are going to do some main events together and put them behind the paywall. We've already done some best ball drafting there. We'll try to do some more of that as time goes. But I just wanted to mention, if you really enjoy the content and you want to support us, signing up for a month, it's $8 a month. You can sign up for 1 month and quit. Just send us, $8 because you're like, hey, this is great. I want these guys to feel that way. We're going to make our decisions on how much content we do and when we're able to do it and how much time we're going to take off in the off season based on how successful it is. Like any rational person would. If we make $1 million off of this, we're going to make podcasts every day, dude. We're going to be doing this constantly. You're going to get so much Jacob and Ben, you won't even know what to do with yourselves. If we make $10 off it, we're going to stop making the pod next year. And we're going to land somewhere in between there. But because we're already above $10, I think, in our Patreon.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to emphasize that for people who really enjoy it. We're getting a lot of favorable stuff. You can support us directly. Give us a tip. Do whatever you want to do. Appreciate you guys.
Awesome. Appreciate the transparency on that. Would echo all those sentiments for sure. So thanks a ton for listening. Thanks a ton for supporting. And we'll be back with you soon.